Samuel tried to wipe the tears from his eyes, but he couldn't because of the salve on his hands and arms. Boy, do they need a bath, Christine said, sniffing her hand. And now I suppose we do too, Samuel said. As soon as possible. I think. This stuff messes with the mind. Samuel watched the students exit the library. A few short days ago they would have been laughing at someone's joke, or talking in urgent tones about a theory raised in class. But they'd chosen Billy's path. A path to freedom, they claimed, to the discovery of their true selves, to the creator in all of them. Well, they had discovered something all right, but it resembled slavery more than freedom. How's paradise? Christine. Chapter 30. Paradise. Sunday night. By the end of the day, Thomas had 24 troublemakers in custody, including Steve Smither, who had evidently taken to putting the neighbors' pets out of their misery. Thomas focused exclusively on those that Johnny considered dangerous. There was no way to round up the whole town, and no reason to do so. The plan was to eliminate Black's front guard before confronting him directly the next time he showed up. If there was a next time. If they were lucky, Thomas had already scared him off. Good plan. Only one, the owner of the feedlot, Bert Larson, put up any real fight. But Thomas put him on his back quicker than a heartbeat when the rabble-rouser went for a gun under the counter. By nightfall they had all the instigators secured. All but Marsuvi's Black. There was no sign of Black anywhere in Paradise. If any of the others had the slightest clue as to his whereabouts, they weren't saying. A search of the business district turned up nothing but empty buildings. Thomas inspected each of the ringleaders' homes and each time came away empty-handed. Marsuvi's Black was simply nowhere to be found. The only real challenge surfaced late that afternoon, after Thomas and Johnny returned to the church. Stanley Jordan, preacher turned jailer, met them at the top of the stairs. I'm not an expert on the law, he said, but doesn't well, actually, that could be a problem. Jordan led them into his office. And turned around. I can't seem to find anyone to press charges. Like I said, Reverend. No need. Jordan continued as if he hadn't heard Thomas. I could press charges, but I'm not sure I should. Most of the townsfolk are still behind Black. He shook his head. God knows I'm not. But I have a certain responsibility to keep my people's confidence. I can't just turn against them. What would that do to their faith in me? They kidnapped you, Johnny said. They destroyed your church. They also paid for that church. And when this is over, I'll need their loyalty. I think you'll have to find someone else to press charges. And I hope you do, but I'm afraid I face a conflict of interest here. We don't need to press charges, Thomas said. Is it just me, or am I repeating myself here? All I'm saying is that I don't want to be associated with what you've done. Here. It wasn't my idea. I've only been doing what you've made me do. And I find it strange that there aren't more policemen here. I'd feel a lot better if there was a stronger law enforcement presence to take the heat off me, if you catch my meaning. Thomas pulled out a chair and sat down. Fine, Stanley. With the phones out, I can't get help here tonight, but we'll bring the cavalry in at first light. What about your cruiser? Can't you call on your radio? The cop looked at Johnny. No. Why can't you go for help? Thomas shifted in the seat. You checked the vehicles lately. Someone went to a lot of trouble putting everything with wheels out of commission. They'd discovered this universal damage several hours earlier. It had been Billy's doing. Had to be. He could write one sentence in his book and the damage would be done. Samuel could fix them all just as easily, now that he knew about it, but Johnny didn't think he wanted to. That, just like bringing real cops into Paradise, could prove disastrous if Billy got smart to it. What about your car? Jordan asked. Thomas shook his head. That won't work. So you'll spend the night? Jordan asked. If you don't mind, I'd like to keep an eye on the prisoners. Sure, Jordan said, but Johnny could swear he detected a hint of reluctance in the man's voice. Jordan lifted a hand to his lips and wiped the sweat gathered on his upper lip. Where is your car? He asked, training his eyes on the cop's face. I came on foot, the officer replied as though it were not only obvious but common in these parts. You say that as if you always walk around the mountains without wheels. What exactly brought you to paradise? I received a call, the cop said. How could you receive a call? The phones have been out for a while. Cell phones are even out. The tone in Jordan's voice had just changed from inquisitive to demanding, and Johnny felt a bead of sweat pop from his forehead. My call didn't come over the phone. Jordan arched a brow. Did God tell you it was 2 miles? He drew the number 2 in the air. What does it matter? Johnny asked. He saved this town, didn't he? No, Johnny, I want to hear this out. Sounds an awful lot like Black to me. What was that Black said? God told me to bring grace and hope to paradise. Something like that if my memory serves me. You peddling grace and hope too. You think Thomas is anything like Black? He's nothing like him. Doesn't it strike you as odd, Johnny, that our police officer here came into town on foot, just like Black, claims to hear from God, just like Black, even talks a bit like Black. And the only person we haven't rounded up today is Black. Don't you find that just a little strange? Johnny blinked. What are you saying? That Thomas is Black. Did I say that? Jordan still didn't move his eyes, but now he wore a small grin. Just stated the facts. You draw your own conclusion. Maybe we shouldn't be so hasty. Was that possible? Actually, Johnny didn't have proof that Samuel had ridden Thomas into paradise. What if something had happened to Samuel, and this was another scheme by Billy, like the story about the hallucinogenic sludge? Maybe he'd found out what was up and ridden Thomas himself. I'm not Black, Thomas said. I'm the law. I'm the law come to set paradise straight. Help her see the error of her ways. Consider these my commandments. He slipped one of his 6 guns from the holster and spun the chamber. And these bullets my precepts. And if these aren't enough, there's an awful lot more where they come from. Enough firepower to make your head spin clean off. I think so. Too obvious. He's wrong, right? Thomas stared into his eyes for a long moment. Believe, Johnny. Trust me. I am as un-Black as they come. Okay. That's good. He sighed, then stood and ruffled Johnny's hair. Come on, son. Let's get this place locked down for the evening. We have a big day ahead of us tomorrow. Stanley Yordon slept in his house, alone. More alone than he'd felt in a long time. He'd lost his stomach for the shepherding game for the time being. He had lost his flock and with it his power. Now he had these voices about grace and hope. Black's grace and hope, droning relentlessly in his mind. To make matters worse, his sheep had been reduced to blithering idiots who didn't know how to blink, much less think. There was nothing worse than a fixed stare, and this insipid bunch had perfected it. When he finally drifted off, his head filled with the voices. Time for church. Stan. Wake up. Stan the man. Suck up some grace juice, Stan. Was he really hearing that? Wake up. Wake. Jordan's eyes sprang open. He jerked his head toward the door. Marsuvies. Black stood tall, alive and in the flesh, not 5 feet from him. Am I your cowboy, Stan? I rather like that name. Endearing, I think. Black's voice rasped as if he had a cold. He smelled musty. Like a stale. You have a door, don't you, Stan? Everybody has a door. There's always a way in. But it was locked. Don't be a fool. Your door has never been locked. What are you talking about? I swear I locked it just last night. Stanley, you're babbling about things that are meaningless. Powerless words. It is a bad habit with you. What does it matter how I came in? The fact is, I'm in. Jordan felt the wall behind him. So what do you want with me? Black wagged a finger. Wrong question, Stan. I want nothing with a pitiful soul like you. I'm here because I can do something for you. Jordan swallowed. Black's thin black hair snaked past his thick neck. He still wore that blasted hat. What did he have to hide up there? A hole. The wind howled past the window behind Jordan. A storm rode on the air again. What can you do for me? He asked. I can give you what you want, that's what. What? Power. You want power. I've got it. I want to give it to you. Power. What's the matter? You can't speak more than one word at a time now. Black raised his hand in the air and brought them together in a booming clap. Power. Jordan jumped. You take me for an idiot. Stop patronizing me. Now that's more like it, Black said. Show some spine. You're going to need it. Why? You've always wanted to have power over people, Stanley. It's why you went to seminary in the first place. You weren't about to be a lowly butcher like your father, now were you? No, the idea of 100 or so lost sheep licking at your hands was far more appealing. And in a small town like Paradise even the pagans respect you, don't they? Black clasped his hands behind his back and spread his legs. But we have a problem in Paradise, Jordan. A very bad problem. The people no longer like you. You are powerless. Let's face it, the only power a preacher really possesses over any flock is bound up with their minds. Black walked to the desk. He picked up a picture of Jordan standing outside the church during his first week. A large sign that hung over the front doors read, "Welcome to Paradise, Father. We love you. And you know why they don't respect you? No. Then let's not waste time guessing. I'll tell you. They stopped respecting you the first year you were here, when you had your little fling with Sally Drake after she and Johnny came to town. You do remember that, don't you? You impregnated her, and then you forced her to put the boy up for adoption when she refused to terminate the pregnancy. Couldn't have a scandal in the town of Paradise, now could we? How in the world do you know? Shut up, Stan, I haven't finished. They would have forgiven you then. They always do. But your true indiscretion was sweeping the whole thing under the rug. You like secrets, Stan. You turned your back on your son, and on your lover, and on the commandments for which you stand, all to protect your little secret. And guess what? It worked. The town made it their secret. They pretended that you had the right to do what you did. Why? Because they are no better than you. Jordan wasn't sure whether he was more terrified or outraged. It was that snake, Paula. Who else would make such a big deal out of something so small, so long ago? They played your game, Stanley, but they also lost their respect for you. Every time you stand up there and of this town is rolling their eyes and the other half is dead asleep. Not a single one of them believes a single word you have to say. Am I close? How dare you accuse me? Jordan's anger washed away his fear. I can give them back to you, Stanley, Black said, moving to the window. I'll do one better than give them back to you. I'll make you the talk of the town. Their guardian angel. More power than you ever thought possible, right here over your own flock. When I'm through, they'll do anything for you. Anything. The words ran into his mind like a hot steel rod. He knew that, didn't he? And Stanley also knew that if Black could turn Claude into a blubbering fool, he could just as easily turn the man into an adoring fool. What about Sally? She's never stopped bad-mouthing me. Black faced him. I can make Sally suck your toes, my friend. What do I have to do? Black smiled thinly. Give me Thomas. Figured. One weirdo wanted the other. If Thomas really was the cop he professed, maybe he could prove it now. A confrontation between the lawman and the healer. A burning sensation stung behind his ears, and Jordan wondered if the flames of hell had ignited there at the base of his brain. He stared at Black, knowing that with that stare he was saying yes. Why don't you just do it yourself? You seem to have the power. Much to my dismay, Thomas has more power over someone like me than he does over you. He's here to protect you from me, not kill you. He's asleep at the moment. If he wakes up while you're in there doing your dastardly deed, I'll get his attention and make things easier for you, but you have to deal with him. Follow. How do you know so much about our town? My affair with Sally was over a decade ago. Let's just say that I've been in a lot of people's minds lately. Think of it as one of my tricks. Jordan didn't trust the man, but his risk was minimal. If Black didn't come through, he could just abort. As for the promise of returning his respect and power. Okay. Black turned away. Chapter 31. The Monastery. Sunday night. Even in Billy's distorted mind, the wholesale transformation of the students in the library tunnel was surprising. The epidemic of boils had become a kind of accelerated leprosy. If not for the worm salve, most of the children would probably be incapacitated. As it was, when slabs of skin tore loose from scratching, they replaced it with the worm gel. Worm gel is better than skin anyway, Paul kept saying. Paul wandered the halls, all 6 of them, coaxing or dragging worms to the large library. In a show of reluctant good faith, he agreed to haul 1 worm to Billy's study for every 5 he hauled to the larger library. Billy had forced his authority with the agreement and reminded Paul of its terms each time he came huffing and puffing into the study, a slug in tow. Most of the children devoted themselves to writing without complaint. Any grievances invariably centered on either the itching skin disease or the lack of dry writing spots. The itching came with an easy solution. Get off your lazy butt and get your own gel. The same advice could be heard given at least a dozen times each hour in precisely those terms. Another dozen in other terms. But the gel itself gave rise to the second complaint. The more gel the children slapped around, the more of it landed on their books, which wouldn't be such a problem if it didn't cause the pages to stick together and the ink to smear. With so many children writing in the library, the dry nooks and crannies soon became gooey nooks and crannies. Both Billy and Darcy noticed that everyone seemed happier when they ingested greater volumes of the gel. Together with the help of Paul, they agreed on the dungeon's first law. To write in the lower levels, one is required to ingest 6 helpings of gel each day. And by helpings we mean 2 hands, cupped together, full. And by each day we mean every 24-hour period, just in case there's any confusion. They called it their first rule of writing. All of the children agreed that it was a good rule. It made things smooth. It helped them write. It kept them out of trouble. Billy made his way back from the meeting in the 6th tunnel by himself, leaving Darcy to work out some details with Paul. The memory of his little encounter with Samuel earlier today made him sick. The business with Paul's worms and the new rule of writing distracted him for a few hours, but now the thought of Samuel lodged in his mind like a stubborn tick. He started to jog. His teeth clacked together with every footfall, like cymbals punctuating the pounding of his heart. His muscles burned, and for a brief moment he wondered if some creatures, like ants maybe, were chewing on them. Maybe the boils housed little animals that fed on the worm ointment and burrowed. He veered to the nearest wall, swiped his hand along a trail of gel, and slapped the salve on his stinging arms. The fact was, he could hardly even remember what had happened upstairs. But he knew this. That last thing Samuel had done. That touching thing. That ridiculous display of feeling, that wasn't good. Bogus. 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 And he had stood there like a cornstalk, like a rebuked child afraid to move. Only he hadn't been rebuked by Samuel. Only touched and held. Man, that was disgusting. You wanna die, boy. A voice rose above the melee in his mind. You wanna die. Yeah, I wanna die. What's it to ya? The salve wasn't working so well just now. He grunted and attacked his left forearm with an open claw, wincing as a slab of skin stuck to his. The thought of writing awakened Billy's desire. He saw the study looming ahead in the darkness, glowing. Darcy must have forgotten to take her torch. The outline of a dozen large worms pulsed in the shadows. He stumbled into the study. The monk stood in the torchlight. The monk. He'd almost forgotten about the monk and his black mask. This cloak and dagger routine no longer impressed Billy. What did the man care if anyone knew who he was? Billy cleared his throat. What are you doing here? I've come to clarify a few things for you. Be my guest. Clarify. I'll start with the book you're writing in. They're blank history books. Discovered by Thomas Hunter. You do remember Thomas Hunter and the race on strain. He saved the world. Who wouldn't know about him? In these books the word becomes flesh. Literally. Whatever is written in them actually happens. It becomes fact. History. Thus the books of history. Billy nodded. And he knew the man expected him to be stunned by this revelation, but he relished sounding informed. Besides, it hardly surprised him. Good. I hope you're right. Have you noticed that the characters seem to have a mind of their own? Course I have. You can't force them, but your influence over them is powerful. Your words are flesh in their minds. Thanks to you. The least as clear as Billy's foggy mind would allow. Billy could see the man's eyes glistening in the torchlight through the two slits cut in the ceramic mask. Do you know about Thomas? You just told me. The other Thomas. The cop, Billy said. Yes, I'm working on that problem. Do you know he's not a real cop? What do you mean? Of course he's real. He's written by Samuel. It was the first stunning thing the man had said in days. Samuel. He's writing into paradise. He's been writing for 4 days. If the people weren't so predisposed to listen to you, they'd be walking around in robes of white. And Thomas, that stupid kung fu cop, has changed the balance of power. Aside from Johnny, he's the only real enemy you have down there. You handled Johnny stupidly by showing him Black's true character in the beginning. Now he's a problem. I suggest you handle Thomas with more skill. I couldn't resist giving him a scare. And I've handled myself just fine since then, so have some respect. Billy paused, irritated. I can kill him, right? I mean, I can kill Thomas. If he's not real, then Black won't get into any trouble if the real law shows up. The monk didn't answer. Touch it. They're covered in it. I mean Samuel and his friends, when they touched you in the upper library. Yes. Well then, it's worth a try. The salve will turn them. Billy asked. Soften them. Billy couldn't imagine Tyler or Christine or Samuel entering the tunnels. Salve or no salve, there's no way they'll agree. No. Do they have greater resolve than you? Of course not. They're just slower. Well then, it is time you brought them up to speed. What about the story? The story is the point. Christine, Tyler, and Samuel are writing into paradise too. Remove their influence and you'll be free to write your heart's desire. Your writing is far more concentrated than the others, something I'm still trying to understand. They're writing what you've told them to write, but half of it is conflicting mush that does nothing to achieve our primary objective. Yours and Darcy's is more focused and to the point. It's better to eliminate the opposition above and focus your own writing than to devote time to the others down here. What about the cop? Billy asked. Go after Samuel and his friends, then write. And when you write, you can be as obvious as you want. You've already let the thread about the gel die. That's good. There's no need to pretend that a little hallucinogenic gel caused the people to see things. Your writing has seduced them already. It's time to go for their throats. He paused. I have some specific statements that I want you to write into your book. I'm working on the wording now. We've just begun, my friend. What I have in mind for this world will blow your mind. He walked to the gate. And what about you? Why won't you show me your face? The monk turned back. He stared at Billy for a long time, then he casually raised his hand and lifted the mask off his face. Billy blinked. How was this possible? How did you? I didn't, Billy. You did. In the wake of the monk's visit, Billy applied himself to his task with a new urgency. He and Darcy found Christine and Tyler less than an hour later, walking from the dining room. They probably visited the cafeteria 3 times a day, like they all used to. Let me do the talking, he mumbled to Darcy. Yeah. Christine and Tyler stopped talking and slowed when they were still 20 yards off. Hey, Billy, Christine said. She was trying to sound natural, but Billy heard the tightness in her throat, as if she had just swallowed a mouse in that dining room of theirs. I beat you handily in the debate. Did I strike you as not being okay? She nodded. Yes, you did. It was good to see you earlier. Oh, quit the mushy stuff, like you're the one to be big here. Where's Samuel? He's sleeping. Honestly, Billy was more relieved than disappointed. We have a problem, he said. Down below. Christine tilted her head in interest and waited for him to continue. He shifted on his feet, wishing he were in his study writing instead of up here playing tiddlywinks with Christine. We've had, an accident. Shannon's sick and can't get out. He held his breath for a moment and then forced himself to breathe, trying to think how a person would really act in his supposed predicament. Problem was, he didn't really care if Shannon or David or anybody was really sick, and he was having difficulty remembering how it felt to care. Shannon is sick. In the forbidden levels. A spark of concern lit Christine's eyes. In the lower levels. They're no longer forbidden, thanks to you. Christine didn't bat an eye. Take her to the infirmary, Billy. It's still open. That's just it. We're all kind of weak. Christine would never buy this stupid little story. Even now she was probably on the verge of throwing her head back in laughter. You're all sick. If she doubted his story, her face didn't betray her. The infirmary. He tried to strengthen his reasoning. We do things that take a lot of energy, so we could sleep for days, but we never do because there's just too much to do. He fidgeted with his fingers. I mean, in a matter of speaking. Kind of like being tired, only it feels like you're sick a little. Billy was quite sure he'd just blown the whole thing, mumbling like a fool. Okay, take us to the entrance. But bring Shannon out to us there. Christine said. Tyler stared at her. We can't go down there. We're not going in. We're just showing a little decency here. But it is forbidden. No one ever said we can't go down there unless Shannon is sick and needs a lift. They just said don't go down. Technically it is not forbidden, although I get your point, it is for us. But Shannon has never been sick down there, has she? How would you like to be Shannon? I don't see why 3 or 4 of them can't carry her to the infirmary. She can't weigh more than 75 pounds. They climbed up the stairs to get here, didn't they? They can't be that weak. They are going to carry her, Tyler, to the entrance. Right, Billy. We'll just help her from there. I don't see how that really violates the spirit of any rule. Billy watched the whole exchange with fascination. Students in the process of justifying. How bad is she? Tyler asked. It took a second for Billy to realize the question was directed to him. Shannon. Yes, well, not really. She's okay but not for long. In fact she could die at any time. You never really know with sickness. Okay. Let's go then, Christine said. Billy did not move. A small voice objected somewhere inside of him. That was too easy, it said. He blinked and realized they were waiting for him. He trudged toward the staircase at the end of the hall. It took them 5 minutes to get to the main floor. Both Tyler and Christine followed diligently. One more flight of stairs into the dungeon. From here the steps were stone, and they absorbed the sound of Billy's steps as he plodded down them. Then they approached the charred black doors, closed like two tombstones. Wavering in the torch's shadows, Billy remembered how his heart had pounded when he first saw the doors. Did Christine feel that now? If the doors didn't get to her, one look inside and she would fold. They all did. He walked to the center of the room and turned around. Christine and Tyler entered with bulging eyes and parted lips, and if he wasn't mistaken, their apparent wavering resulted from weak knees, not the shifting flames. He had his answer. Billy glanced at Darcy, walked to the doors, and shoved them open inward. Darcy walked in ahead of him and he followed without looking back. No matter, he would see them soon enough. The doors closed behind him, and he forgot about Christine and Tyler in favor of the writing ahead of him, down that hall to the right, where Paradise and Thomas and Claude and Steve waited. Come on, he said to Darcy, and together they jogged into the mountain. Chapter 32, Paradise. Monday. For the second day in a row, Johnny awoke with a start and bolted up in bed. For the second day in a row, he knew something had changed, but he couldn't place it. Then he remembered Thomas. It was barely light. He scrambled out of bed and shuffled through his drawers for a new shirt. Found one with a faded red Indy car and pulled it out. He started to shut the drawer, then remembered his socks and bent for the first pair his hand felt. His mother's words rang in his head. Every morning, Johnny, you hear? That doesn't mean every other morning or every week. You change your socks and underwear every morning. Behind him, the glass clattered and his mind posed a simple question. Why is the glass rattling, Johnny? Because of the wind, of course. Wind. Johnny spun to the window. The wooden sill framed a nearly leafless forest. Bowing to the east, backlit by a dark, overcast sky. Did Thomas know? He had to get to the church. Unless Black stood in the street between his house and the church with his head raised to the sky, laughing. Johnny shuddered and yanked the shirt over his head. He tore down the hall and shoved his head into his mother's bedroom. Empty. Johnny ran through the living room and threw open the front door. The street was also empty. Wind blew in anger. Above Paradise, the sky lay flat and black, a lid clamped over the valley. Worse than he'd seen it. Johnny swallowed his dread and ran for the church, shielding his eyes from the wind with his hand. An obscure thought floated lazily through his mind. A memory of walking along the beach in Florida, feeling the sand squish between his toes and giving way when he pushed hard. He realized he'd forgotten to put the socks on. Johnny reached the railing, climbed the steps as fast as he could, ignoring a pain in his right leg. He pushed the doors open and stepped into the church, breathing hard. He ran through the sanctuary toward the stairs that led into the basement. Still no sign of anybody. The stairway descended into darkness, and he wondered briefly if the town was still asleep. It couldn't be much past 8, and the way folks slept around here. But the cop would be awake. As far as he knew, fictional characters didn't even sleep. Unless Samuel slept. Maybe Thomas was down in the basement making coffee, waiting for him for Johnny, his partner, to show up so they could go flush out Black and hang him. Johnny crept down the stairs, scarcely making a sound. He landed safely on the basement floor and poked his head around the corner. The room looked like a black cavern. He let his eyes adjust to darkness. Slowly, familiar forms took shape, the support posts rising to the ceiling. Every 10 feet, a Nerf basketball hoop mounted on the far wall, the white door leading to Paula's office. The kitchen door stood, faint white smudge that appeared in the middle of the door. It looked like someone had hung a plate there. Maybe Thomas, so that if it moved it would bang. Smart. But it wasn't really hanging, was it? No, it was sitting on a counter. And then Johnny knew he wasn't looking at the kitchen door at all. He was staring into the kitchen itself, through a wide open door, at the far counter where a plate leaned against the wall. The kitchen was empty. He spun, half expecting to see Claude on the stairs, glaring down at him. But the stairs were empty too. He tore up the steps, terrified. He wanted to scream out. To shout out the cop's name. Thomas. Thomas. They're gone. Thomas. But Thomas was gone too. Maybe being chased by crazies. Maybe chasing crazies. Or maybe he'd already moved them. Maybe other cops had come with a paddy wagon and taken them all to Junction. Johnny made the snap decision to run out the back, just in case they were waiting for him in the street. He tore past Father Jordan's open office and struck out for the door, gulping at the air like he had just thrust his head through the waves after being submerged for a full minute. The door pulled open in his hand, and the black sky filled its frame. Johnny leapt through and found himself face to face with a scene that made the image of Black walking into town seem toasty warm by comparison. The church's back lawn ran 75 feet before meeting the forest. Wooden picnic tables sat along the fence, leaving most of the lawn open for children to play. A large oak tree spread, but none of that mattered right now. Right now Johnny's eyes fell on the crazies who stood on the grass where the children normally played. They stood like a mob of looters caught red-handed, 30 or 40 of them, with their hands hanging by their sides. A dozen miniature sunflower windmills mounted to the fence posts spun madly in the wind. The door behind Johnny slammed shut, but he barely heard it. He stood frozen on the small porch, his arms and feet spread in a defensive crouch. Claude Bowers and his little gang stood atop the picnic tables. They might have been gathered for a class photo, all wielding hammers and axes and other heavy objects. A larger group bunched closer to the building. Johnny recognized Katie Bowers, her long strawberry hair flying back from her head. Nancy stood on the edge like a big piggy bank. No one spoke. Only a few even turned their heads toward Johnny. The rest stared past him to his right, where the huge oak reached for the sky. All of this he saw in a second. Then Johnny followed their eyes. Thomas's body hung from a hemp rope wrapped crudely around his neck and tossed over a wide branch above the jungle gym. The body jerked spastically, as though it had dropped just moments before. The body had been stripped naked except for a white t-shirt, white boxer briefs, and white socks. They'd cut him up with a machete or maybe an axe. His lower lip sagged, swollen to 3 times its natural size. His eyes were gone, leaving round red sockets staring into the wind. Steve Smither stood below the spinning body, looking up at Thomas like a third grader beaming at his first place science project. His hands were bloody. They were all killers here, but Steve had wrapped the rope around the neck and yanked. And Black had been there breathing in his ear the whole time. Johnny's heart and lungs still weren't working right, but he turned around and clambered for the door. By some miracle it swung in and he lurched forward. His head felt like a sounding gong, mounted on his shoulders, vibrating. A taunting voice warbled back there somewhere. "Wanna trip like I do? Wanna trip? Wanna trip?" From deep in his gut, fury rose into his chest. He stumbled down the hall, and then began to run. By the time Johnny reached the front doors, he was sprinting. 1,000 voices were screaming in his head, but he couldn't make them out anymore. He crashed through the doors and tumbled down the concrete steps. The first sob broke from his throat there, while he was Chapter 33, The Monastery. Monday. Samuel's plan had failed. Johnny had no clue how the offenders got out of the locked kitchen, or how they managed to overpower Thomas, but they had. That was all that mattered. Johnny tore up the mountain, cutting his bare feet and scraping his knuckles. He'd believed. At least yesterday he'd believed. Today he wasn't sure about much except that he didn't have too many alternatives left. Even if he could find a way to Delta, he couldn't risk bringing more people into Billy's line of sight. And he couldn't try to outwit Black's next move. After Johnny's performance at the meeting Saturday night, he probably was Black's next move. Fleeing to the monastery was his only choice. Samuel would be there, waiting for him. Maybe he could get his hands on one of those books. Maybe he could give himself some powers. Johnny reached the large canyon quickly. He raced around the boulder and faced the cliff where the monastery hid. Samuel. His voice echoed, then drifted off. Samuel. Nothing. Johnny called the name repeatedly for the next 10 minutes. Without a response. He took a few more minutes to gather himself. Then he walked to the outer door, twisted the rusted handle, and pushed the door open. The monastery reached for the cliff top. Anything powerful enough to put this huge, ancient monastery here surely had the power to kill Black. Samuel. He couldn't just stand here forever. For all he knew, Samuel had gone into the tunnels himself, or been killed. The awful possibilities mushroomed in his mind. Why else wasn't Samuel coming out? Thomas had been killed because something terrible happened to Samuel. Billy had done something. Believe, Johnny. Believe. He strode to the front doors, turned the handle, and walked right in. The massive foyer was empty except for the paintings and doors and table. His heart echoed in his ears. And what about the basement? Samuel had hesitated. Off the main hall to the left. A long series of stairs. Take you down. Not a place anyone in their right mind would want to go. Johnny located the main hall before he could tell himself any different. The hall was wide, carved from stone and paved with bricks. Indirect sunlight filtered from high above. Off the main hall to the left. Hello. Johnny jumped back. A boy stood by a door down the hall, looking at him. His skin was bleeding, and he'd smeared some kind of ointment all over his body. He looked worse than the crazies in paradise. Hello. The boy said again. Who are you? Johnny. Have you seen Paul? No. The boy. Have you seen Samuel? Johnny asked. No. I think he's with Billy. Do you know where Paul is? I haven't seen him. The boy wasn't lucid. How do I find Billy? He's in the first tunnel. The one on the right. Then the boy walked by him, headed off to find Paul. The boy hadn't tried to kill him. That was promising. Johnny ran for the door and stepped into the darkness beyond. Now what? He couldn't go down without light. He was about to turn back, to search for a light of some kind, when it struck him that the darkness seemed to thin farther down. Maybe just because his eyes were adjusting to the dark. He put a hand on the rough wall and descended several steps. Then several more. The stairway curved to his left. And, yes, a yellow light filtered up from below. Johnny went down on his tiptoes. The light came from a torch in a small room outside a large black door. The door to hell. He stared at the door and realized that he was making a terrible mistake. Running from Claude on familiar territory was one thing. Knocking down the gates of hell to take on Black was another. He glanced back at the stairs. If it was true, if Samuel was with Billy, then as far as Johnny knew, he might be the only thing standing between Billy and paradise. He wasn't at all confident that anything he wrote in a book would happen. He wasn't even sure he could find a book. Or survive Billy. Or survive Samuel, if he'd been lured down. Johnny's hand glistened with a thin coating of the worm gel. The room branched into several tunnels. Johnny veered into the one on his far right. He stared down the long dark passage. Thick pipes ran along. One of the pipes began to move. He stood rooted in place for a long minute, breathing hard. Worms. But he couldn't go back. Not now. Samuel. His voice echoed down the hall. Samuel. It's Johnny. There was water dripping somewhere. His head felt odd. Dizzy. A bit. Numbed. Billy. No one responded. He took a few steps and stopped again. The slugs throbbed in his torchlight. What was he thinking? He should find Samuel's father first. Come on back, a faint voice called. Billy. It didn't sound like Samuel. Johnny hesitated, then switched the torch to his left hand, gave the worm a wide berth, and walked down the hall. He saw light and headed for it, jogging now. On the right, a gate dawned. Past the gate, a room with a desk and some bookcases. In the room a boy with red hair sat at the desk. Next to the boy sat a girl. Both had pens. Well? The boy asked. No threats. Not yet. Johnny stepped into the room, barely breathing even though his lungs strained. You're Billy. Yeah. Just that. Just yeah. Now what? Is Samuel here? No. You're destroying paradise, Johnny said. Do you know that? The girl next to him answered. Take a hike, Johnny. They were just kids. Samuel had told him that. But somehow he'd half expected monsters. They looked more lost than mean. Who are you? He asked the girl. That's Darcy, Billy said. And like she said, take a hike. The books they were writing in looked old, fragile. He could see the outline of Billy's writing. Hard to believe it had done so much damage. But he knew a few things about this writing. That it could be resisted, for example. He'd done it 100 times in the last few days. And whatever smell was trying to make his head spin down here could probably be resisted as well. Johnny set his jaw. Billy laid his pen down. A grin tugged at his lips. So tell me, Johnny. How does it feel to be the lone holdout? We'll get you soon enough. You can't hold out forever. Samuel can only do so much. He's put all his eggs into one little fool, and if I'm not mistaken, the little fool has just wandered into the forbidden dungeons. Have you tried our slime yet? Tastes pretty good. It's not too late to stop, Johnny said. You just killed someone. Do you know what they do to murderers? Steve killed him, Billy said. Not me. And obviously you're a little short on the uptake. Thomas was no more a real person than Black is. Black. What do you mean, Black? He's a teacher from the monastery. Sure he is. The one up here is anyway. The monk told me to write a character named Marsuvi's Black who would have a little fun with paradise, so I did. I wrote him just like the real Marsuvi's Black. But the real Marsuvi's Black is still here. I saw him yesterday. He never left the mountain. You're saying that the man I saw walk into town is just like Thomas? Well, not just like Thomas. Personally, I think he's way more interesting. Thomas was a bore, Darcy said. You see, Billy said. I was the first one to write a character into paradise. And unless I'm mistaken, he's kicked some Major Thomas butt. Forgive me, boys, but this is boring me to tears, Darcy said. Johnny, please, please, please take a hike. You can talk till you're blue in the face. While you're at it, give us a hug or something. Show a little love. Samuel tried that. It won't work. We're busy, and you rudely interrupted. Now, take a hike. Their minds were scrambled, duped, doped. No different from the people in paradise. Deceived to the core. He looked at the shelves packed with black leather-bound books. An idea dropped into his mind. Maybe you're right, he said, edging up to the desk. They looked up at him in a stupor. Several pens lay beside Darcy. If I joined you now, would you let me share this office with you? Who said anything about joining us? Darcy said. I just did. Eat the worm gel, Billy said. But nobody except me and Darcy right in here. When this story of paradise is over, what will you do? He said, putting his torch in the receptacle by the boar head. Over. They clearly hadn't thought that far. Will you go after another town? Where will it end? Johnny moved closer to the desk. If he reached out his hand, he could touch it. Who says it ever ends? Well, maybe I just have a point that you should listen to, Johnny said. He pointed at the gate. When you see that gate, what does it make you think of? They both turned and looked. Johnny picked up one of the pens, reached over to Darcy's book, and wrote as fast as he could, speaking to cover the scratch of the pen on paper. If you look hard enough, you can see someone's face, can't you? Johnny was given great powers to destroy Billy. He scratched out Billy, anyone who stood in the way of truth. What are you doing? Darcy shrieked, jumping up. She slapped his hand. The pen drew a long scratch on the page and flew across the room. He tricked us. He wrote in my book. Billy was on his feet, eyes round. What did he write? She read aloud. Johnny was given great powers to destroy anyone who stood in the way of truth. He wrote give me that, Billy said. He grabbed a pen and scrawled words below what Johnny had written. There. Billy was given great powers like Johnny, only to destroy whoever he wants. Darcy pulled the book away and spoke as she wrote. And so was Darcy. She slammed the pen down. You thought we were so stupid. Go ahead. Destroy us with your great power. But Johnny had no great power. The books don't work like that, you idiot, Billy said, face flushed. I'll give you exactly 1 minute to get out of here, or I'm going to make every last one of the students switch to write one character and one character only. 3 guesses who that might be. You can't turn me that. Not you. Sally. My mom. Billy nodded, grinning now. She'll join the cop before nightfall, I can promise you that. The clock's ticking, boy. 45 seconds. You can't do that. Johnny felt smothered. She has nothing to do with this. She has everything to do with this. 40. I'd start running, Darcy said. Save mama. 35. Johnny grabbed his torch and bolted. Leave her out of this. Promise me. 30. It's a long climb up those stairs, boy. Johnny ran down the tunnel, through the black door. He took the stair at a time, challenged by a spinning head. Into the hall. He made it. He was sure he'd made it. But knowing Billy, how would the boy know he'd made it? Johnny spun. Samuel stood by the entrance to the atrium, staring at him. Johnny hurried away from the door, past Samuel, into the light. He was trembling, a jumbled ball of confusion. You've been down there, Samuel said. You have to wash that smell before. Marsuvi's black as Billy's character, Johnny said. Samuel blinked. Black. He's not the real one. As real or not real as Thomas. You're sure? How? I was down there, Samuel. Johnny wasn't sure why, but he was yelling. Not that he didn't like Samuel. On the contrary, he was desperate for Samuel to save them. I saw Billy. He told me that the teacher you know is the one who convinced Billy to write Black into paradise. Then Marsuvi's is still in the dungeons. The real one. And it means that Billy knows he can bring characters to life. He must have known about Thomas. And what's to keep Billy from writing 100 blacks into paradise? Samuel recovered from his shock and glanced around the atrium. For a moment Johnny thought the boy might burst into tears. Samuel ran to Johnny and threw his arms around him. I'm so sorry, Johnny. I was with my father after we found out what happened to Tom. Then I knew you were coming, but I couldn't make sense of. The lower levels must have cut me off. And you're right, paradise is in terrible trouble. It's hopeless. Johnny felt awkward standing there with Samuel's arms around him. Samuel's surreal blend of innocence and intelligence unnerved him. What are you going to do? Samuel pulled back. He was trying to be brave, but he couldn't hide a frantic light in his eyes. I don't know. I think my father is terrified. It's not only the dungeons, it is the town. This was never supposed to happen. You don't have any ideas. It's falling apart. It's all unraveling. I'm the only one left. The rest of the students are below. The overseers. Samuel lowered his head into his hands. Have you thought about using the books to give yourself power? I have the books. What more power do I need? It's hopeless. No, I mean give yourself the power to deal with black. You're the person who believes you could move mountains, couldn't you? Samuel looked at him. Then you could go down yourself, Johnny said. With that power. Down where? To paradise. Samuel ran all the way to the top floor. He'd washed Johnny off at the well and then sent him back to paradise to scope things out in hiding. His father was meeting with desperate teachers. He would join them, but not until he was sure. Ever since Thomas's death, which had awakened him at 4 in the morning, alternatives. He'd pieced most of it together, but Johnny had given him the key. Samuel slipped into his father's study and crossed to the desk. Behind it stood a bookshelf. On the top shelf, David had placed the original book of history that Christopher and Samuel had written in. He stood on his father's chair and pulled the black volume down. Set it on the desk. Opened the cover. His father kept a sheaf of loose-leaf paper in the front. It was a journal of sorts, documenting his experience with the book. He turned to the book's first page. An entry about Thomas Hunter stared up at him. Next page. Christopher's childish handwriting. Several entries. One about a desk and one about a cat and a dozen others that looked like experimental entries testing the book's limitations. Next page. The entry about the books going into hiding. Another page. Here. 2 entries in his own, though much younger, handwriting. The first entry limited the books to the residents of the monastery and clarified the way the books must lead to love, which is written by any person not currently residing in the monastery at this time, and or which does not lead to the discovery of love will be powerless. This rule is irrevocable. The second entry. He read it quickly. Samuel settled into his father's chair. He reread the entry again, and he knew he'd found the key. Samuel returned the volume to its place on the upper shelf. He set the chair as he'd found it and left the office. He could hear Raoul's voice at the conference room door when he laid his hand on the doorknob. He paused and listened, calming his nerves. You have to call the authorities, David. The project has failed. Samuel could write string up every single one of them. It's over. We're beyond the authorities, his father said. How do you suppose they'll deal with Marsuvi's Black? He's beyond the reach of ordinary mortals. Then what? We have to trust the books. There's no one left to write in the books. The rest of the children have fallen. There is Samuel to write in the books. His father's voice boomed. They were desperate. All of them. Even his father. Especially his father. Samuel pushed the door open and stepped into the room. 7 of the overseers were gathered around his father. All turned to look at him when the door opened. He shut the door and faced them. Marsuvi's Black is in the dungeons, he said. He's left paradise. Andrew asked. He never left the monastery. At least not for long. The one in paradise is Billy's creation, inspired by the real Marsuvi's Black. Raoul struck the table with his fist. I knew it. Billy would never have gone below without being lured down by that monster. You're sure about this, Samuel? His father asked. I'm sure. Then we have to stop him. Raoul said. That could be the key. It's the students who are writing, not Marsuvi's, David said. Does he stand to gain by doing this? That should be obvious, Andrew answered. He found David's journal and learned about the history book's power. God only knows how long he walked these halls with that knowledge before deciding to use the books. But to do so he needed the children. I argued 6 months ago that he should be replaced. As I recall, Raoul, you stood with David in suggesting that the students were old enough to consider a few alternative ways of thinking. Marsuvies never suggested open rebellion. Raoul said. The children had to start drawing lines for themselves. Better here than out there. He threw his hand toward the window. Enough, David said. This gets us nowhere. We'll deal with Marsuvies later. The students are our concern now. And paradise. But knowing that Marsuvies has been complicit may help us to determine their objective, Raoul said. Where does Billy hope to take this story of his? Andrew shook his head slowly. Can you imagine the power someone like Marsuvies Black would have if he could control the books? You can't control the books, Raoul said. It's the children you have to control. Where's Billy taking this story? I don't think Billy knows, Samuel said, moving to his father's end of the table. Marsuvies may, but Billy and the others are writing for the thrill of it. If you had any idea how it feels. He looked at them, wondering if they could understand. The power to do what you want is nearly irresistible, he said. Pure free will, with the power to back it up. It's like a drug. Several of them nodded. Then you're saying that Billy writes just because he can, Andrew said. Literally. He has no ambition except to write until the desire for it begins to burn him. If that's the case, his passions will be insatiable. He'll go. No one argued this time, not even David. I have a plan. They all looked at Samuel. We have to get to Billy, or you're right, he won't stop. The key to paradise is Billy. Are we agreed to that? Go on, David said. The key to paradise is Billy, but the key to Billy is paradise. Or more precisely, the key to Billy is defeating him in paradise. The only way to change Billy may be from within the story itself. That's why I sent Thomas, but Thomas failed because his power was limited to skills given to him by me. You're right, for every character that I write into paradise, Billy can just write another character with the power to outwit or overpower my character. They watched him. But what if I could write another kind of character who has more power than any character Billy can ever write? What do you mean? Raoul said. You already tried that with Thomas. Samuel placed his hands on the back of a chair. Thomas was fictional. A fictional character is once removed. I doubt he can act or feel on his own. But I think I can write a character who has the power to love and to affect love. What kind of character? His father asked. Me, Samuel said. I can write myself into paradise, and I can give myself a power that not even Billy can overcome. They stared at him. David stood. You way. I still don't see how that is so different from Thomas, Andrew said. Samuel will be a character that will do exactly what I would do, equipped with my feelings because I know myself and am myself, Samuel said. But he will also be more than me, because I'll give him a special power to blow Black back into the hole he came from. He paused. A superhero. Do we know what happens if such a character is hurt? What do you mean? Could it backfire? Andrew clarified. If Marsuvies Black were killed in paradise, would the real Marsuvies die here? Samuel hadn't thought about that. It didn't matter. He looked at his father, who was now staring at him with round eyes. We must trust the books, father. You said it yourself. This story will lead to the discovery of love. If I can't affect paradise this way, I'm not sure there is another way. You realize you're the last student with the power to write love, Raoul said. It is critical that nothing happen to you. Nausea stirred Samuel's stomach. Nothing will. Chapter 34. Paradise. Monday. Johnny reviewed the simple plan he and Samuel hatched before he left the monastery. Johnny would go to paradise, take complete stock of the situation, and wait for the Samuel that Samuel would write behind the old theater. Showdown at noon. That was it. Johnny wanted more, but Samuel couldn't or didn't want to give him more. Johnny also wanted to wait for Samuel so they could go down together, but as Samuel pointed out, someone needed to make sure that Sally's life wasn't in danger. Johnny would be the eyes on the ground. Again, he reached the overlook and pulled up, panting. The sky was dark, very dark. Black was definitely back. He looked down into paradise. The first thing he saw was the smoke boiling to the sky, not at an angle, whipped by wind, but straight up. That meant no wind. But this wasn't necessarily a good thing. It was more likely a condition that Billy needed to move his story forward. His eyes followed the smoke down to a huge ring of fire on the ground, twice as wide as Main Street. It took Johnny a second to make out people through the cloud of smoke, but they were present, maybe half the town, standing around in no particular pattern, watching the fire. Johnny dropped to one knee to give his right leg a rest. He didn't know what they were doing, but one thing was clear. Billy's story was changing. Today was a day of firsts. First time for no wind while Black was in town, assuming Black still was in town. First time any of them had gathered outside around a ring of fire. First time they'd killed a man. Johnny looked past a figure ran toward the fire. Too hard to see who. Johnny watched him cross the line of flame, take something from. He saw the black-clad man in the middle of the ring for the first time. Marsuvi's black. He handed a blazing torch to the runner, who then sprinted to the south, toward the old theater. Smoke rose from the building 20 seconds later. They were torching the town. Johnny stood to his feet. Was Samuel catching this? The old Starlight Theater began to burn quickly. Flames licked at the roof and spread down the east wall. Johnny watched in wonder as the wood blazed with orange flames that rose 3 times the height of the building. This was it. They were reducing paradise to ashes. What was he supposed to do now? He couldn't just go down there and throw water on the fire. Something on the theater's roof caught his eyes. It was something wrapped up, strapped to the top. Something the size of a body. Something like Thomas. This was their funeral pyre. Marsuvi's Black was burning the cop's body and doing it with enough overkill to permanently impress the town. Mess with me and I'll burn you bad. Real bad. Real bad. In that case, they probably wouldn't burn the rest of the town. Indiscriminate burning would be too simple-minded for Billy. Then again, in his doped-up state, simple-minded might be just his ticket. Johnny thought about turning around and running back up the mountain. But the only way he could really help Samuel was to stay here and take stock, as planned. It would be a while before he could meet Samuel at the theater. Johnny to the church, flung open the door, and entered. The people began to disperse then, in small groups, headed back to their homes or to various buildings to do only God knew what. In the end only one small group remained. Had to be Claude and company. They hauled a car into the middle of Black's ring of fire, which had now smoldered to the east of the still blazing theater. One of them threw something, a homemade bomb, at the car. It burst into flames to the delight of several smaller figures in the group. Fred, Peter, Roland, and another kid. 10 minutes later, they all left. Johnny finally stood. He couldn't tell the time by the black sky, but if he figured things right, an hour up at daybreak, an hour at the monastery, a half hour to this point, another hour here. It was about mid-morning. Samuel would come in 2 hours. Johnny gave himself a full 60 minutes to reach the town. No need to rush. He could hear the dying flames crackling when he was still a good 50 yards this side of the meadow behind the old theater. Then he was there, at the tree line, staring at the charred and burning remains of what used to be the old theater. No sign of anyone. He hurried around the south edge of town, toward the alley that led to his house. Still no one. And still no wind. The trees were stripped bare of leaves, and the sand was still piled against the buildings. But something felt different. Johnny stopped 50 feet from the convenience store. It was the sky. The sky wasn't as dark as it had been when he left the overlook. Samuel. Johnny felt a burst of courage and headed up the alley, watching left and right like a hawk. Someone yelled somewhere, and Johnny dove behind someone's house. But it was distant, he quickly realized. Coming from inside a house where an argument had broken out. Maybe from the saloon. He hurried on. Johnny entered his house from the back, listened for a moment, and sighed. With relief. Not that he was safe here, but the familiar hall with its familiar silence was at least a good sign. He checked his mother's room and found it empty. He donned the socks he'd left behind and found his shoes. Put them on. Now what? The church. Not a chance. Black was in there. Johnny stood in the hall for a full 5 minutes, trying to think things through, but he really didn't know what he could do short of running out into the street and yelling for Black to come and get him. His vision blurred. The wall moved. Billy. Johnny pressed his palms against his temples and focused on an image of Samuel. The wall became still. Someone, maybe Billy himself, was sitting in that damp dungeon below the monastery, trying to break into his mind. He didn't know how it worked, but he knew enough for it to terrify him. At least he knew how to fight the images that the house moved under his feet. That was it, he had to get out. Johnny ran down the hall. The walls bent in, the door buckled. He plunged ahead anyway, slammed through the door and out into the alley. The ground was shaking out here. Not a slight tremor, but a violent vibration that blurred his feet. He cried out in terror, turned south and sprinted. Whether by Samuel's doing or his own he didn't know, but the world returned to normal after he'd taken 3 or Aspen out of the town's sight. He lifted his hands to his face and leaned against the trunk. The ground might not be shaking anymore, but his fingers were. Johnny eased his seat to the base of the tree. He would wait for Samuel. Chapter 35. Paradise. Monday afternoon. Johnny. Samuel's voice cut through the still air, and Johnny jerked upright. Samuel. Here. The boy walked from the trees. He was dressed in the same cotton shorts and white button-down shirt he'd worn both times Johnny had seen him. The only difference was his shoes, which were now brown walking boots. He seemed a bit frail, but in every way Johnny could imagine he looked exactly like Samuel. Johnny scrambled to his feet. Thank God. Thank God you came. Of course I came. Samuel flashed a mischievous grin. Did you have any doubts? He even talked like Samuel. As far as Johnny was concerned, this was Samuel. Johnny glanced back in the direction of the town. Did you see? I saw. You saw. And you're not worried. Samuel winked. I have a plan, remember. It was your idea. Not really. What now? Now we do. Johnny wasn't sure what he doubted or didn't doubt. A week ago he spent most of his time trying to figure out how to spend another lazy summer day. Now he spent every minute trying to figure out how to survive the chaos. He trusted Samuel, sure. But he'd trusted him with Thomas too. They burned Thomas, Johnny said. I saw that. Johnny looked at the boy's arms and hands. So, what did you do? Samuel held out his hands, palms up, and studied them. You mean what powers do I have in these hands? Did it work? I guess we'll find out. So, what are they? Well, it is pretty powerful stuff, I guarantee you that. Would you like to see me throw a few fireballs? The idea that fire could actually come out of those white hands was incredible. He reached out and touched Samuel's palms. You can do that, sure. Actually no, I can't. Samuel lowered his arms. It'll take a lot more than a few fireballs to deal with Black. Trust me, Johnny, the power I've written into these hands will terrify even Black. Now. Samuel walked past him. Shall we go give it a try? Hold on. Samuel walked toward the town as if he hadn't heard Johnny. He was actually going into. Samuel turned back. Repeat after me, Johnny. I believe. Say that with me. I believe. I do believe. And I believed with Thomas, but. No, Johnny, you believed in a lawman named Thomas. Now I'm asking you to believe in me. Was there a difference? There's a difference, Samuel said. Okay then. I believe. Samuel smiled. Shout it. Now. They'll hear. We can't just waltz in there like this. That's the point. I want them to know you're with me. Scream it out, Johnny. The louder the better. Johnny glanced past Samuel at the buildings just visible on the other side of the trees. The sound might not carry too far out here in the woods. I have a better idea, Samuel said. He turned and walked toward the town. Again. Come on, this way. Johnny hurried to catch him. What idea? Stay close, Johnny. This way. Samuel picked up his pace. He walked right out into the open and crossed the clearing, headed for Main Street. Johnny followed quickly, thinking that Samuel had a point about staying close. At least nobody was in the streets. Keep walking, Johnny. He's right. I see him. Keep walking. You're with me. Remember that. You're with me. Johnny kept walking. The next time he looked up, he saw that Black was smiling. They walked out into the middle of Main Street, to the center of the smoldering ring of fire, up next to the car that was still sending up black smoke from its tires. Samuel stopped. Here, Johnny. Shouted out for the whole town to hear. I believe. He was committed now. Surprisingly, Johnny wanted to shout it out. Not in defiance, but in self-defense. He prayed that whatever power Samuel had written into himself was more than what Black could throw at them. This was their last hope. He had no choice but to align himself with that hope. He gripped his hands into fists. I believe. He yelled. I believe. Fire crackled behind them. Samuel stared at Marsuvi's Black, who now stood with his feet planted wide, hands on hips. Billy's character began to chuckle. He grinned wickedly and walked to his left, keeping his eyes on them. The black-clad monk mounted the church steps, stretched his neck back and around at unnatural angles as if loosening up, then disappeared through the doors. Come on, Samuel said. This way. He headed for the church. Watching Samuel strut straight for the gates of hell, Johnny wasn't sure how much he wanted to believe anymore. Samuel, stay close, Johnny. Then again, he wasn't in a position not to believe. He followed, heart in his throat once again. The church had been nearly gutted by fire. Johnny stared over Samuel's shoulder, through the open inner doors, past the pews, to the stage. To Marsuvi's Black, with his hands flat on the charred pulpit, grinning back at them. 2 nights ago Johnny stood on that very stage, confronting Black in front of the whole town. But that was before the church had been burned. Before they'd torched the theater. Before Thomas had been cut open and hung from the tree. Before Johnny really understood what Billy could do. Black tilted his head down and stared up from under the rim of his hat. Welcome to my home, Samuel, he said. Samuel walked in and stopped just behind the last pew. Johnny kept the boy between him and Black. Do you like what I've done to the place? Black asked. If you ask me, it lacks imagination, Samuel said. I'm more interested in you. First time I've actually seen someone who's stepped out of a book. Then pay close attention, my little friend. Your last creation was a bit of a disappointment. But he bled, I'll give you that. Thomas did bleed. I'll be sure not to disappoint you again. Do you bleed, Samuel? Black asked, grin still fixed. Samuel hesitated. Not good. Why don't you find out? He finally said. I intend. Think. What's wrong with now? They've waited so long that we have to draw it out. Bring the climax to a slow boil. It's what they want, you know. They want blood. Now, Marsuvies. Take my blood now. I would love to, but now. Johnny started. He fought a terrible urge to run for his life. Say it again, Samuel. Say it to me. You're reluctant to show me your power, then. Black spread his arms wide and faced the ceiling. Oh, how I love the sound of begging. Show me your power, Marsuvies. Please show me. Samuel clasped his hands behind his back. That's what I thought. You're thinking that I'm trying to goad you, and you know that the man who gives into goading is the weaker one. But you're wrong. I just want to see if you're half as frightening as my friend Johnny here says you are. All I see now is the copy of a failed monk who's found some fancy black clothes. Black lowered his head. His grin had softened. Perhaps I should be the one testing your power. Perhaps. Then show me what you have. Prove yourself. Show me that you are more than a stupid, reckless little boy. No, Samuel said. No, not now. 3 days have passed since the debate, Samuel said. Challenge you to a new debate, at nightfall in 2 hours, in front of the people of this town. This time they, not the students, will be the judge. Win the debate and I am gone. Lose the debate and you are gone. Black blinked. You'll have to take that up with Billy. You take it up with Billy. You're his creation. I will debate Billy through you. It's my right to demand a debate. The only difference is that you are my opponent and the people are my judge. Don't tell me you're weaker than Billy. Black came around the podium. A 2/3 majority. The same as the monastery. Yes, I accept, Black said. Then I bind you to the terms. Bind all you like. I own their hearts. Samuel was silent for a moment. You are in their hearts. He slowly lifted his hand, palm out. Black's eyes widened. He took a step back. Without any further warning, the man in black began to tremble from head to foot. Johnny had never seen a look that resembled the terror that masked his face. How could that be? As quickly as the fear swept over Black, it left him. He began to laugh, as if delighted by the horror he'd just experienced. Samuel stared him down for a long moment, turned, and walked straight for Johnny, who ducked in front of him and exited the sanctuary first. But what did you do to him? Samuel stepped past the outer door and looked out at the smoldering remains of the old theater, 100 yards south. I showed Black himself, he said. Think of me as the human mirror. He winked and walked down the steps. Seems as though evil loves evil. That's it. You're just going to debate him. What about the town? Don't worry, Johnny, I haven't begun to show my power. We're going to save this town. Chapter 36. The Monastery. Monday night. Raoul balanced the round silver platter in his right hand and carefully lifted the white lace that covered the delicacies he'd arranged for David. He selected the foods himself from a short list of favorites he kept for special occasions. A delicious crab bisque, sliced Hungarian cheese on crackers, and a small pound cake stuffed with vanilla pudding. He arranged them neatly around a tall glass of passion fruit juice. David had retired to his bedroom after Samuel left the conference room several hours earlier. Frankly, the food seemed like an empty gesture. But Raoul knew that the director hadn't eaten since learning this morning that Thomas had died. For that matter, neither had Raoul. He rapped on the tall cherrywood door twice. Come in. The voice sounded strained. Raoul stepped into David's chambers and spoke before looking up. I've brought you food, sir. Some of your favorites, I think. He shut the door and faced the room. Andrew prepared this crab. David's bed lay stripped of its sheets, which were strewn to one side of the mattress. One of the pillows leaked goose feathers, which littered the maroon carpet like large snowflakes. A toppled chair lay beside a tray of untouched food Raoul had delivered the previous evening. So even last night, when Thomas had taken the town, David was more worried than any of them knew. David leaned against a window that overlooked the valley, one hand on the sill, the other cocked on his hip. His hair looked like a mop, his face was gaunt and unshaven. Sir. What could he say to this? Yes, Raoul. What is it? I've brought food. So you have said. Put it down. David stretched his neck as if fighting off a wrenching headache. His eyes remained closed. You haven't even touched the other. Yes. Please take it, Raoul. Take it all. I appreciate the thought, but I'm not hungry. Raoul noted that a drape had been pulled loose. How do you expect me to eat while? He trailed off. Truly, I can't imagine your anxiousness. Raoul set the tray on the bed. But isn't this our only hope? You seemed quite confident. It's the safest way, all things considered. David paced in front of the window. Don't get me wrong, I care for the town, but when it comes to my son, I think of them as butchers. There's nothing concrete to suggest that any harm will come to your son. Besides, Samuel's a strong boy. I'm sure he's doing well. And what do we really know? David demanded. Only what we can see. From the overlook. Anything could happen in any one of those buildings without our knowledge. Samuel had received his father's reluctant yet firm commitment during the meeting not to send anyone else to the town. It was too dangerous not only for them, but for the town itself. They couldn't risk setting Billy off. Trust the books, father. And trust me, Samuel had said. Trust the books, Raoul said. Isn't that this from you, who insisted we shut the project down? I was wrong. Anyway, we're beyond that now. We're committed to this course. At this point, no much at stake. David sighed. I'm afraid, Raoul. For the first time I'm really afraid. What if this fails? Then we're in serious trouble. We can't lock them in the dungeon. We can't force the books away from them. God only knows what they've written to protect themselves. We can't just kill them all. We still have Samuel. And what can Samuel do? If this fails? David turned back to the window and lowered his head. Raoul waited a full minute before breaking the silence. Sir. But David had slipped into his own world and refused to be interrupted. He stood there, his head hung, leaning on the window overlooking paradise far below. Raoul finally took the old food tray, replaced it with the fresh one, and slipped into the hall. God help them all. Marsuves Black barged through the lower library doors, his black robe flowing behind him like trailing bat wings. Are they all here? He demanded. Billy stood by Darcy and Paul, just inside, his hands folded behind his back. Yes, he replied. The overseer stormed past the Samuel was up to something, that much he'd discovered when Black had barged into his small study, cursing the worms on the floor. Get these slugs out of here. Remove them immediately, you fools. At first Billy had thought it was Black, yelling in his ear from paradise. But then he turned and saw the gaunt overseer. Marsuves, what are you doing down here? Sleeping. For heaven's sake, boy. Don't you know what's going on? Darcy came awake beside him and lifted her head. Marsuves Black, you look just like what I imagined. Wonderful. Are you as dense as Billy? What do you mean? What do you mean? If you would quit eating so much of that sludge, maybe your minds would be able to see beyond your own stinking noses. It was your idea that we eat so much sludge, Billy said. I didn't say to drug yourselves into a stupor. Your whole story's falling apart around your ears and you don't even see it. Of course I see. Wake up, boy. Black yelled. Samuel's undoing your story. No, he's not. I have things under control. You do not. I want every single child in the main library in 20 minutes. You have them there. You understand. Everyone. In their books, a few still writing. Black scanned the room and evaluated the scene like a general might measure his troops before a battle. Billy counted them quickly. 32, 33. Oh, right. He, Darcy, and Paul. That made 36. Wake up. Black screamed. Billy jumped, but the writers below hardly noticed. They turned slowly toward the voice. Billy could almost see their minds crawling from the slumber of deep fantasy where words became flesh. Wake up. This time a few jerked up. The rest lifted their faces toward the balcony. Look at you, all slobbering over your own puny stories. Now 33. Sets of eyes focused in on him like bats. What are you writing? I'll tell you what you're writing. You're writing meaningless, disjointed pap. He stabbed a finger toward the far wall. They should have been dead by now. Dead. But does even one of you know what is really happening in our lovely town of paradise? No one provided an answer. No, you don't. And do you know how I know you don't know? Because if you did know, you would stop it. But you aren't stopping it. You're too busy pacifying your own pathetic fantasies with your individual characters. What could the man possibly be ranting about? They had been writing non-stop. How could he come in here and accuse them of this nonsense? The monk had lost his lid. Does anybody know where Samuel is? He's writing, Billy said. We know that. He's written a character based. The real Samuel. The real Samuel is in paradise. Billy blinked. Samuel in paradise. He's in your town, waltzing around as if he owns the place. Physically? Billy asked. Physically, your leader wants to know. Black turned and leaned toward Billy. Yes, physically. Spittle flew from his mouth. Marsuvies turned back to the children, who sat up now, paralyzed by his outrage. Now, I want you to write into the minds of paradise like you've never written before. You hear me? I won't permit a single child to leave this library until we have our way with him. The statement hung in the air like the reverberation of a gong. No one will move, for any reason. You don't eat, you don't sleep, you don't talk, you don't even breathe more than absolutely necessary. I want every last cell in your measly, mindless brains to narrow on paradise. You hear me? No one moved. Well, don't just sit there. Give me a nod or something. Like a room full of little pistons, their heads bobbed. Billy felt Black's eyes on him. What, me? You don't expect me to write here, do you? Impossible. He could never write with these slobs. Have I been speaking to the wall? What does no one mean to you? No one. But the first fool who fell. Black looked back at the statues below. And I want 6 of you. He motioned to a table of 6. Have you learned nothing? Black asked with a quiet, quivering voice. He began to yell. Right deception. Right wickedness. Right hate. Right murder. Right death. Just right, you blithering idiot. Black spun from the railing and stormed from the balcony. The door to the library slammed and the outer tunnel filled with a horrendous scream that bent the children over their books. What do we do? Darcy asked. We write. Chapter 37. Paradise. Monday night. The town of Paradise waited in eerie silence. A red sunset, the first in a week, glowed on the horizon. A string of citizens shuffled soundlessly into the church. If there's trouble, Johnny said, if things don't go like you want, if we get separated or anything. Not that I'm saying we will. But if anything happens, we could meet in the forest behind the theater where we met earlier. Samuel looked at him without answering. I'm just saying if, you know. Just in case, Johnny said. And if that doesn't work, we can meet at the monastery. That's even better. They'll never find us there. Johnny looked up as the Last of them straggled into the church. We should try to get a jump on Black, don't you think? Samuel stepped from under the tree north of Main Street. Follow me. He walked toward the church. Johnny followed Samuel down the street and up the front steps. He paused in the entryway, expecting Samuel to give him a word of encouragement before walking into the crowded sanctuary. It seemed like a good thing. But the boy didn't even look back. He walked straight inside and pushed the inner doors wide, like he was shoving saloon doors open for a six-gun showdown. Johnny hurried to catch Samuel, fixing his eyes on the boy's heels as they touched the carpet. No one moved as they walked by, at least not that he could see from the corner of his eyes. He imagined Steve sitting on the far side, bloodied as he had been the last time Johnny had tried to talk sense into them. Bottles, eyelids drooping. Samuel stepped up onto the stage and approached the pulpit. Johnny followed him, walked halfway to the podium, and stopped. He raised his head and scanned the room, careful not to look into anyone's eyes. Claude and gang sat in the first row, gripping bottles as he'd imagined. Crud and dried blood matted most of those present. Some wore it on their hands, as if the blood had come from another body. Others below their nostrils, where they'd ignored a bleeding nose. Some bore long, scabbed gashes. The blowing dust had stuck to the mess and hardened, so their skin looked like it was peeling. They sat in the pews, arms limp or crossed. Steve Smithers sat on the far left, grinning wickedly. Father Jordan avoided Johnny's eyes. Paula wore a loose halter top. Her hair was twisted like a nest of snakes, and her eyes were glazed over. He couldn't see his mother. Then he did, near the back, dress torn and dirtied, face puffy. He could hardly recognize her. Johnny felt a tremor shake his bones. Samuel cleared his throat. Hello. My name is Samuel, and I've come here tonight to debate Marsuvi's Black. You'll decide who wins. Okay. No response from the zombies. Black isn't here yet, but I'm sure he'll show himself soon enough. It will be a debate of few words, because most of you aren't hearing too well anymore. But you'll be presented with a clear choice and you'll have to decide. Do you understand? Still no reaction. Without love, everything falls apart, Samuel said. Something had changed in his voice. Love is what I offer you today. The words seemed to flow from Samuel's mouth like red-hot lava, smothering the auditorium, including Johnny, who could barely breathe from the sudden tightness in his chest. Have you forgotten what true love is? Samuel choked up. He swallowed, and Johnny wanted to cry. No. Steve Smithers stood, grinning. No, we do remember. 400 crazies shifted their gazes to the man. Steve walked toward the stage, hands clasped behind his back. He's right. You know, we've been deceived. We're a brood of vipers. We're sick with the stench of death. Just like the boy says. Samuel hadn't said that. Steve spread his arms and faced the crowd as if he were the preacher now. This little stranger here who came out of nowhere is right. We are deceived. All of us, blithering fools wrapped in a web of deceit that's strangling us to death. Steve stepped onto the platform. Johnny took a step backward. The man's eyes were glassy and bloodshot. Samuel stood by the pulpit quietly, eyes fixed on Steve. We're all sick, disgusting perverts. Spineless, puny pukes. Steve crossed toward Samuel, who stood still, expressionless. No relief, no joy, no anger, nothing but sadness. And that small chin tilting up to Steve. Those soft lips, those long lashes unblinking. Do it, Samuel. Tell him. Tell them all. Tell them you come from a monastery and you have enough power to flatten them with a single word. Talked. Not even close. Someone was talking through him. Billy or Black. Johnny glanced at the crowd. Some of them sat up a little straighter, he thought, but their faces remained blank. The grin vanished from Steve's face as if someone had cut the strings that lifted it. Viper's bite. Samuel, you come down into our town and try to mess with our story and see what you get. You get bit, 'cause our worms are snakes too. Did you know that? This is your idea of a debate, Billy. Samuel said. That's right, I am Billy. And if this isn't a debate, what is? We're all down here in the dungeons and you're up there. What does that tell you? It tells you that you're dead meat. Samuel had expected to confront Black. Why had Billy chosen Steve? You know the consequences of evil, Samuel said. Love, Steve cried, spreading his arms. I think it all leads to. Steve gasped and went white. He stared at Samuel in shock. Slowly his face twisted, first with anguish and then with horror. He threw his arms to his face, doubled over, and screamed bloody murder. The crowd didn't react. Neither did Samuel at first. He let Steve scream and scream. And then he spoke softly, so that only he and Steve could hear. Steve, meet Billy. Billy, meet yourself. Think of me as the human mirror, Samuel had said. He'd just shown Steve and Billy their own souls. And then he released the man. Steve's screaming stopped while he was still bent over. For a moment Steve remained frozen, staring at Samuel from a half-crouch. Then his eyes flashed. He stood up slowly. His lips curled back, and his whole body began to vibrate. Johnny couldn't move. Steve's face flushed and the veins stood out on his neck. His jaws snapped wide in a shriek that nearly brought Johnny to his knees. Beyond Steve, a dozen crazies rose to their feet. Steve was screaming words. Johnny realized. It was my choice. I deserved that much. My choice. The man paused to catch his breath and then flung out his arm. Take him. Take him. Take him. Take him. Mumbles and grunts swept through the crowd. A bunch of them climbed over their pews and started for the stage. Johnny couldn't move his feet. Steve kept screaming, take him, take him. Take them. Take them. Samuel calmly lifted one hand to the dissenters who rushed the platform. Back, he said. The power of the word hit the auditorium like a thunderclap. 400 people staggered back. If they were seated, their heads bent back as if struck by a gale force wind. If they were standing, or climbing over a pew, or walking for the stage, they were thrown backward into their pews or on their seats. Steve had stopped his screaming. I love you, Billy. Do you still know that? Steve fell to his knees, face drooping in anguish. I'm sorry, Silence. Steve's lips twisted to a snarl. He jumped to his feet. I hate you. I hate you, Samuel, you sick little puke. He flung his arm out. Take them. Take him. Black stood at the back, head tilted down, blue eyes flashing. Every head turned. Why are you just standing there, Steve? I've been so good to you. And now you turn on me. Am I wretched or vile? I should slit your gut and let you bleed dry. Steve stared, eyes wide with confusion. I didn't say. Do you like our debate, Samuel? I think it is time for the people to vote. Black walked down the aisle, fixated on Samuel. Johnny turned to Samuel in a panic. For the first time he saw fear on the boy's face. Sweat was leaking down his temple and his eyes were wide. Just 2 hours ago he'd thrown off Black's attacks easily. Had something changed? Marsuvi's Black stepped up on the stage. So, you think that throwing around a little love will do the trick, do you? I'll admit, it is a tad fascinating, but ultimately boring. He jerked his head to face the people. Thing is, I have the same power. Do you mind if I show you, Samuel? I'd like to show you my power. He walked to the far edge of the stage, eyes on the congregation. I think the people would like a little show. Black cocked his head back like a Pez dispenser. His neck doubled back, nearly at a right angle to his shoulders. For a moment he gave them a side profile of the stunning pose. Then his whole body turned, upper torso first, followed by hips and legs. Like a robot, Black's round dark mouth faced them like a gaping cannon. The air blurred with a white streak. Straight from Black's open jaw. Then 2, then 10, then 24 white streaks, flying in formation toward Samuel. Before they sharpened too white to be Black's teeth, but from the corner of his eye Johnny saw that Black's mouth was bleeding onto his shirt, and he knew that they were his teeth. The jaw came to an abrupt halt 2 inches from Samuel's nose. It snapped at the air once, paused, then again. Clack, pause, clack. The teeth retreated in another sudden flash and snapped back into Black's jaw. He leveled his head, and Samuel said, "The point is," it struck Johnny that this wasn't Black and Samuel as much as it was Billy and Samuel. 2 kids, dueling. The smirk on Black's face faded. He opened his mouth wide, thrust his head forward, and roared at Samuel. His lips stretched as wide as his head and his teeth flashed like a piranha's. 3 things came from Black's throat. A crackling roar that shook the whole building, a heat wave that blasted Samuel, and a black vapor. The force of the roar bounced off an invisible shield that enveloped Samuel and rushed past Johnny. He could see it because of the black vapor, like a jet stream in a wind tunnel, and he could feel the heat. Without the shield, a person would probably be burned to a crisp, Johnny thought, cringing behind the boy. Samuel was protecting him. The roar lasted at least 10 seconds. And then Black's mouth clamped shut. For a moment Billy's character stared at Samuel, amazed that he hadn't dislodged a hair, much less damaged him. Slowly Samuel lifted his right hand, palm out. Something came from that hand. Johnny couldn't see it, but Black could. His face twisted into an unholy mess of distorted features. For a moment, Johnny thought. Instead, he began to laugh. He grabbed at his face and pulled at his flesh and shrieked with laughter. Delighted with himself. He was seeing himself. Evil loved evil, like Samuel had said. Black cocked his head back at a right angle, twisted it to face the church, and let his laughter echo over the auditorium. As one the people began to scream. Their faces contorted in fear. They pulled at their hair, and their eyes rolled back into their heads. Then they lunged at each other and began tearing at each other's faces. Samuel faced the people and held both hands out like a mime pushing a wall. "No," he said. A barely visible shock wave emanated from him. It rippled through the air and through the people, starting at the first pew and picking up speed as it spread to the very back. As the wave struck them, it cut off their screams. They gasped and were thrown back more forcefully than the first time. They collapsed, groaning and sobbing. Even though Johnny wasn't in the wave's path, he felt its effect. A warm force cut through his muscles like an electric current that charged him with love and desire for more love. He staggered back and dropped to one knee. Tears flooded his eyes, and he knew that Samuel would win this contest. Wailing and sorrow and love swallowed the church. Black recovered and glared at Samuel in a rage. Samuel lowered his arms and everything changed. Instantly, the power that had come from Samuel vanished. Claude struggled to his feet, dazed and confused. Then others, like, "The choice is theirs," Samuel said. For an endless moment no one else moved. Steve stood on the stage, lost to the world. Claude's face settled and he breathed heavily through his nostrils. Chris and Peter waited behind him, blinking and waiting. Katie looked like a rag doll. A slow smile formed on Black's face. "The choice is theirs," he said. Then, he thrust his hand out toward Samuel. "Take him," he said. Still no one moved. Black stretched his mouth wide, like a snake preparing to swallow a goat, and roared again. Again the building's foundations shook. But this time Samuel didn't stop it. His body shielded Johnny from most of the shock, but the air around him seemed to shake. Claude was 10 feet from the stage when Black's blast hit him. He grunted and rushed forward, eager to reach Samuel now. At least 50 rushed the stage. Samuel did not resist. He was either caught off guard or had something planned for the last moment. Black's roar didn't ease up. His thundering mouth gaped, as long and wide as his face. Claude leapt onto the platform. Samuel. Johnny didn't wait for a reply. He whirled from the podium and ran. He's just standing there. This isn't possible. From the corner of his eye, he saw Samuel collapse under Claude's huge body. He disappeared under a sea of flesh. A handful of crazies were scrambling over the baptismal sign. He reached the brass knob and yanked the door open. You're leaving, Samuel. You can't leave, Samuel. He turned his head back, just enough to stare into the twisted face of Chris Ingalls, just strides away. Johnny bolted. He slammed through the rear door, stumbled out to the back porch, and took a hard left, over the steps. The dark lawn met his feet hard. He rolled over the grass and spun back just in time to see a large object fill his vision. It smashed into his head and knocked him on his back. He twisted to one side, fighting for breath, but they stood over him now like grim reapers. Then Johnny was screaming long vowels that hurt his throat. His mind could barely form thoughts, much less words. Hands grabbed at his arms and legs and yanked him roughly from the ground. A big hand pounded down on his forehead, and he heard his screams taper off. Another fist hit his head, and his world began to fade. It hurts, he thought. And then he didn't think anything for a while. A little later or much later. He didn't know which. He opened his eyes and it was dark. The musty smell of dish rags filled his nose. He managed to turn on his back. Slowly, like the coming of the tide, he thought some things. He thought he was alive. He must be alive because his head was throbbing with pain. He thought he shouldn't be alive. He wasn't even sure he wanted to be alive. He thought he might be in the root cellar below Smithers' saloon. He thought Samuel was. Actually, Chapter 38. The Monastery. Monday night. Billy dipped his quill into the inkwell, trying to gauge the emotions that ran through him. A drop of sweat fell from his forehead and marked the page by his thumb. How would he describe this story? Enthralling, exhilarating to be sure. But there was more. The pen clinked against the glass jar of red ink as he withdrew his hand. An unsteady hand did not suit writing. He swallowed to wet his parched throat. He'd been writing in the balcony for hours, barely aware of time, forgetting the fact that Black had driven him from his study. He'd lost himself in the singular objective of pushing this story to the ending for which it begged. The shaking in his hand had started when he heard Samuel's voice, like an echo in his skull. I love you, Billy. His first instinct had been to search the balcony for the voice. Samuel has escaped. He's left paradise and come here to turn me over to David. But the voice hadn't spoken from the balcony. It echoed like a church bell. In his mind, he'd stared back at the writing book, hands trembling. The story was speaking back to him now, as if he were actually there in paradise, not just whispering suggestions to his characters, but participating with them. The writing no longer focused on paradise. Samuel had changed that. The boy was trying to destroy the power behind paradise. He had reached past the people in the church down there and was trying to quiet him. But Billy had no intention of being quieted. Paradise was his town, his story. No one would throw him out. Not even Samuel and his precious father. Especially not Samuel and his father. And the boy had the audacity to say, I love you, Billy, right there, out loud. As if that would gain him favor. Wake up, boy. Things don't revolve around the 4 rules down here. We make our own rules, and they're not rules of love. I love you. Please. Love was for stories. Of course, This was a story. Everything was really a story, penned or thought or acted out at some time by someone. Billy brought his trembling fingers to the paper. He could do so much on this page. This was the power of storytelling, that he could tell whatever story he chose. A stray thought hit him. Thomas Hunter found the books in a place called the Black Forest. Billy impulsively wrote a sentence in the bottom margin, as much to break the tension as for any other purpose. Then the man named Thomas found himself in the Black Forest, where he fell and hit his head and lost his memory. He wondered what that would do. Another drop of sweat plopped onto the page. Billy brushed it aside with his little finger and continued writing into paradise. The tension of the story immediately gripped him again. Now let us see about your powers, Samuel. What move will you make now? In this chess match of ours. Samuel had given up too early. The red lines ran jagged from Chapter 39, Paradise. Monday night. For the 7th time in a week, Marsuvius Black stepped out of the trees to meet Marsuvius Black, the character that Billy had written into existence based on him. The black trench coat and Stetson hat, the boots and belt were figments of Billy's imagination, taken from costumes he'd seen in one of the dungeon rooms, but otherwise Black looked exactly like Marsuvius. In so many ways, he was him. In so many ways, he wasn't him. It was odd how the progression of evil worked. It always went from bad to worse, no matter how much mind he'd ever applied to the matter. And in the progression was a line which, if crossed, offered no retreat. He reached that line 7 years ago, while he still worked in Vegas, but he'd turned and run into the desert for solitude and repentance. This time he'd crossed the line. Now there was no turning back. Any fool could see that. The strange thing was, he really didn't have any ambition to rule the world or wipe out the country or even Las Vegas, that beautiful den of iniquity that spoiled his soul to start with. He'd joined Project SHOWDOWN because of its fantastic promise to test good against evil in the most unusual way. David Abraham had essentially created an incubator for good in these children, believing that if properly protected, good would prevail. His whole life had been a raging battle between good and evil, and as far as he could see, evil, not good, always ended up on top. The pig always returned to its sty. Dogs always lapped up their vomit. But then he'd found the blank books and discovered the inscription that destined them for the purposes of love. After 3 months of care, had been found by him, as by David, because he was meant to use them. And how? To test good versus evil, naturally. To test the rule of good and evil that had waged eternal war in his own heart. If by their own irrevocable rule the books would lead to the discovery of love, then he would force their hands, so to speak. He embraced evil with abandon, knowing that in the end he was really embracing love. Isn't that what the rule meant? If by his embrace of evil he could produce love, didn't that make evil itself a kind of good? Yes. And a good thing too, because in these last 2 weeks he'd been once again reminded how much he loved evil. How delicious each terrible, wonderful, delightful act really was. Why did evil always feel so good? Because evil was in fact a kind of love. True or not, he swam in the hope that it was more true than all the nonsense thrown his way over the past 40 years. Marsuvius stared at his fictional counterpart, who stood on the edge of the green belt staring at the now deserted church across town. The charred remains of the old theater smoldered in the waning light off to their left. Marsuvius wasn't sure what Black had done to Samuel after the meeting, but he knew what had to be done now. He walked toward Black. In all honesty, if his gamble paid off and evil did turn out to be a kind of good, then he was obligated to flex the muscle of evil as much as possible, wasn't he? And he would have no problem doing so. In the meantime, there was only one thing that stood in his way. So you came after all, Black said without turning to him. Was there ever a doubt? Marsuvies said. I never needed you. Marsuvies black. Him. The boy was perceptive, rendering him with surprising accuracy. The mischievous grins, the arching eyebrows, the curvature of his fingers, even his accent. Didn't need me. You or me, Marsuvies said. You mean my flesh. Black jerked his head around and flashed a searing smile. He lifted his arm, bit deeply, and pulled a chunk of flesh from his hand like a wolf might pull the flesh from a fresh deer kill. He spit the hunk of meat at Marsuvies. Have a bite. Marsuvies sidestepped the flying flesh. The child in Billy had become part of Black. At this very moment, he wasn't sure if Billy had suggested to Black that he bite his own arm, or if Black had done it on his own. He stepped up beside the character and stared ahead. Dusk was coming fast. By morning this would all be finished. You're sure you can do this? Marsuvies said. You're insulting me. Black asked. No, I just want to know. We have a lot riding on it. I think you're assuming too much. Without me, you have nothing. I've made sure of that. Only I have the knowledge required to take this further. And tonight I will extend my own power by having Billy write several far-reaching statements into the books. Black pulled a book from his pocket and lifted it up. You mean the books? Like this one. He had one of the blank books. This monstrosity running around with a book in his possession. When we're finished here, we'll hand the monks in the monastery the same fate and start over, Marsuvies said. Only this time it won't be a small town sitting conveniently at the bottom of the mountain. It's been a real drag working with you, Black said. Billy talking. I have. To be honest, although I had some respect for you in the beginning, I've come to hate you. Maybe it was the mask you insisted on wearing. Maybe it is the fact that you look like. Black faced him, eyeball to eyeball, not a foot away. Black. Just remember who the real flesh is around here, Marsuvies said. I'm not sure I like real flesh. There was a glint in his eyes. If Marsuvies didn't know Billy's dependence on him better, he might suspect a foolish streak of murder in there. Black sniffed. Do I smell like that? You smell like the sewer that you came. Black's right hand shot forward. Marsuvies felt the intense pressure before. He felt the pain. He looked down, stunned. Billy's character had thrust his hand through his midsection. The man's black-sleeved arm was buried up to the elbow in Marsuvies' gut. Pain overtook him like a tsunami. He felt his body start to fold over the arm. And it occurred to him that Black had shoved his hand right through his spine. It had to be broken. Billy had knifed him with Black's arm. Or Black had done it on his own. Marsuvies tried. Then his world went black. Chapter 40. The Monastery. Tuesday morning. Gasping for breath from the climb, Raoul banged on David's door and then barged in without waiting for a response. The rising sunlight burst through the window across the room. David lay on the bed, raising to his elbows, eyes wide and lost. Raoul's banging had obviously aroused him from deep slumber. I beg your pardon, sir, but I have news. David swung his legs to the floor. News. Well, tell me. Raoul hesitated. How could he say, tell me? I'm afraid it is not so. Just tell me, man. Raoul paused, terrified to speak. Samuel has been taken. Or should I say the character that Samuel has written has been taken. Taken. What do you mean, taken? They have him. I don't know how. I can't seem to find Samuel in the have they hurt him. David stood. Raoul stepped back. They used force. They had to restrain him. David's face washed white with shock. My boy would never resist them. He swallowed. Did they hurt him? Pardon me for saying, but he wasn't. He's my son. Samuel didn't write a character. It's him down there. Raoul stared at the director, aghast. Samuel himself had gone down. How could? It was the only way. He had to go himself. Have they hurt him? David demanded. David's erratic behavior earlier now made perfect sense. Raoul wanted to fall down and beg David to end this madness, to save his son, to yank Billy from his tunnels and punish him so that he would never forget. But he knew they were past all that. So, instead he nodded. Once. For a moment David stood like stone. His face flushed and he began to quiver. His eyes glassed with tears that dripped straight down his cheeks into the floor. Then the father threw his hands to his face and wailed, "Oh, my son. Dear Father, have mercy on my son." He stepped across the room, blind to his steps, smothering his face with large hands. No, no, no. Raoul could hardly bear the sight. Jesus, our blessed Savior, have mercy. My son. How could they hurt you? How? He whirled to Raoul, who jerked in fright. David's face twisted into a furious snarl. If they hurt a single hair on his body, I'll kill them. He roared. You hear me, man? I'll kill them all. Raoul settled to one knee, waiting. David, you can't. He leapt to his feet and ran after David. He's going down there. He's going down to paradise to rescue Samuel. He'd seen the look in those inflamed eyes. That desperate love of a father willing to cast his own head on the block for the sake of his son. But if Samuel couldn't stop them, neither could David. For the first time since Raoul had learned the truth about the books, he knew they had to trust their power or suffer even more harm. He was suddenly certain that if David ran into paradise, they would kill him along with his son. The tail of David's nightshirt disappeared into the stairwell. David. Raoul flew down the stairs in threes, hand on the rail to keep from tumbling headlong into the stone walls. David was taking the stairs even faster. The slapping of his bare feet echoed up to Raoul. Only once did he see David, and then only his heel. When Raoul burst into the atrium, the large doors were already swinging closed. David. Raoul ran for the doors, yanked them open, and sprinted into the canyon. His sandals slipped in the soft sand as he rounded the first corner. The canyon gaped, a dry riverbed littered with large stones. Now a full 50 yards ahead David sprinted, his arms and legs pumping like a world-class athlete. Surely he didn't intend to run all the way down to paradise. But wouldn't Raoul do the same? What kind of good sense could overcome blind passion for a son? On the other hand, if David was right about the books, interfering with them might be the undoing of them all. In trying to save his son, David might condemn him. Raoul ran hard, panting through burning lungs, praying that David would come to his senses. There had to be a way, but it wouldn't be up to a man like David, who had no power. Samuel was a strong boy. He had more power than the lot of them, including Black. Samuel would find a way. Raoul lost sight of David at the canyon's mouth. If David stopped, it would be at the overlook. Falling more than running, Raoul stumbled down to the overlook. He burst from the brush 15 minutes later and doubled over, gasping. David knelt at the ledge, silhouetted against the overcast sky. The town of Paradise lay like charred sugar cubes 2 miles beyond him. Sir. Raoul approached carefully. David faced the town and rocked back and forth. On his knees, wind whipping at his thin cotton shirt. His body shook with sobs. Raoul now saw. A lump rose into his throat. He knelt beside David and placed a gentle hand on his back. I'm sorry, he said, feeling the words inadequate. Possibly even insensitive. Chapter 41. Paradise. Tuesday morning. Johnny awoke with the smell of onions and earth in his nostrils. At first he thought his mother had let him sleep late and was out in the kitchen preparing dinner, but then the image of 400 crazies sitting in church pews filled his mind, and he jerked his head off the cellar's dirt floor. His temples throbbed and he groaned. He rolled on his back and tried to focus on his dark surroundings. He'd put potatoes in the cellar for Steve on occasion, on the wood shelves lining the walls. Their roots grew like long white tentacles. Pretty smart, Steve had said once when Johnny pointed them out. They only grow toward the light. Like snakes trying to escape. He'd chuckled, and Johnny decided then that he didn't like root cellars with hairy potatoes. A distant sound drifted into the cellar, something like a whistle at a soccer match. Johnny rolled toward the wall, the one made of wood with the crack near the top above ground level. He saw it now, tangled with a dozen roots reaching through. If he remembered right, the crazies had thrown him in here at night, but now daylight glowed through the small crack. The whistle came again, but it sounded more human this time. A high-pitched shriek, the kind made by placing a thumb and a forefinger in your mouth. Johnny never could whistle that way. Who could possibly be whistling out there? Samuel. The boy's face filled his mind. That blonde head and those blue eyes. Smiling softly. The whistle came again, a little sharper now. Johnny caught his breath and snapped to a sitting position. A scream. It was a scream. The sound reached his ears again, only this time with a word. Please. It was Samuel's voice. Johnny scrambled to his feet, ignoring the raging headache. Samuel. The name echoed around him. What were they doing to him? Samuel. He tore at the shelves, sweeping potatoes and onions onto the floor. He yanked the spud roots from the crack and pried his right eye to the thin opening. A large tin garbage can blocked half his view on the right. The alley lay vacant on his left. 50 yards ahead, tall evergreens bent in the wind under a gray sky. The morning air carried the sound to him again, and Johnny knew they were doing something to Samuel out on the front street. Something that made the small boy scream. He beat against the boards on both sides of the crack. The planks were rotted nearly clean through. Dirt drifted into his eyes. He brushed at it, and then in a fit of frustration he threw himself at the slit. With a crack, the rotted board caved out and hot wind blasted into the cellar. Johnny jumped back, surprised that he'd broken the board. A sharp report chased by a shriek rode the wind. Johnny dove at the opening and pulled desperately at the rotting boards. They came away in clumps. He pulled 4 down and clambered through the opening into the alley. He jerked his head each way. The alley was empty. He edged along the between Smithers' saloon and the convenience store, trembling. 5 yards from the end, he eased down on his belly and snaked along the ground. Then Johnny poked his head around the corner and looked out to where the blacktop split the town of Paradise in two. The whole town had gathered, right out there on the asphalt, kneeling in a large semicircle with their backs to Johnny. Claude Bowers and his son Peter were dressed in the same overalls they'd worn for a week. Paula was there, on the edge closest to Johnny, crying. Katie knelt 10 feet from Paula, glaring at her with contempt, draped in a weasel or bear or some other fur. Father Jordan knelt on the far side, his head hung low, his hands folded, like he was giving a blessing for the gathering. The rest of the people knelt into the wind, facing Steve. The only missing character in this gathering was Black. No sign of Billy's black-clad preacher. Steve Smithers stood in the center of the circle with arms spread. He had a whip in his right hand, and he was gloating at something on the pavement. From his perspective hugging the dirt, Johnny couldn't see over their heads to see what Steve was looking at. Very slowly, with quivering muscles, Johnny pushed himself to his knees. They'd stripped Samuel's shirt off. He knelt with his head bowed to the black pavement, facing away from Steve. His shoulders and arms were bleeding. Long streaks of red and blue on his back. Johnny's vision swam. Steve lunged forward with the whip. A black streak lashed through the air and cracked just above the boy's back. A thin red gash opened on Samuel's white skin, as if he were a painting and the artist had flipped a red brush over the canvas. Beating Samuel. Would they strip him and whip him? Samuel's quiet cry rose into the wind. But not a scream like before. And no crack of the whip. Johnny lifted his head. Samuel had struggled to his feet. The young boy stood with the wind at his back, his legs spread and slightly bent at the knees. He was calling out in a thin voice. Father. The words sliced into Johnny's heart like a razor. Father. Please, please help me. Johnny glanced at the mountains. The lookout jutted from the rocky face, like a gray shoe far above them. Beyond it. Father. Father. Please, Father. Save me. Samuel was wailing now. The frail boy sucked at the air with a dreadful groaning sound and then shrieked again. Don't let me die. Don't. He was sobbing now, screaming between gasps. Please, please, I'm just a boy. Tears streamed from Johnny's eyes. He began to groan softly, and he knew they might hear him, but he didn't care anymore. He wanted to die. A thought forced its way into his mind. Why didn't Samuel run? Samuel stood on the road at least 5 paces from Steve and the rest of them. The Starlight Theater's remains hid the path leading to the mountain behind. The boy had a way of escape. He had to know that he could reach Wales, he cried to the wind until Johnny thought his heart would burst. The people knelt in their semicircle, unmoved. Steve still gloated. Jordan still bobbed his head. Only Paula wept. Possibly for Samuel, possibly for herself. Whip him, Stevie, Katie said. The whip flashed. Samuel fell. His body smacked onto the asphalt like a slab of meat. The fall took the wind from him and he twisted in agony. Then his soft groans carried to Johnny again. Father, please. Father, please. Anguish. Such anguish. Johnny clenched his eyes and pushed himself back, keeping his belly low. He turned first to his right and then to his left, undecided where to go, only knowing that he had to get away. Away from where the people watched the boy rolling before them with mild interest, like chicken farmers watching another rooster go under the axe. Why do they flop like that, honey? Why? I don't know, they all do. Chapter 42, The Monastery. Tuesday morning. Raoul sat on his haunches 10 yards from the edge, rocking back and forth, a monk committed to a mantra. He'd watched David's endless pacing along the lookout for an hour. In the beginning he'd attempted several approaches of consolation. Samuel's a strong boy, he said, and David just wept harder, leaning against a lone tree whose roots had found purchase on the rock surface. Trust God, he said. He gave us these books. Trust the books, David. In the end, love will prevail. But David just whirled to him. He's my son. Every moment is the end. Raoul had changed tactics then. Never mind that a wrong turn now could wreak havoc throughout the earth. The pain of this one moment seemed to supersede any such risk. Go down and save him, David. Together, we could. You don't understand, David groaned. You're his father, man. What else is there to understand? We'll burn the town to the ground. I can't. David's cry sounded guttural and horrid, and it struck Raoul that he was tormenting the man with such absurd statements. If Thomas and Samuel couldn't stop Black, surely a troop of unarmed monks would only walk to their deaths. But how could a father stand by while his son was brutalized? David would give his life for Samuel without a second thought. There was more here than Raoul knew. More than this simple agreement they'd made to trust the books. Samuel. David groaned loudly. My son, Samuel. He tore at his hair with both hands and stepped up to the very edge, sobbing. For a terrifying moment, Raoul thought he would leap from the cliff. But he just stood there, moaning in the wind for a long time. Please tell me that you know what you're doing, sir. Just tell me that there is a way out of this madness. But David refused to respond. He hadn't spoken since. He only paced from the tree to a large boulder 30 feet away, bursting into tears so often that Raoul wondered where the tears could possibly come from. After an hour, just as a numbness settled in Raoul's mind, the first wail reached them from paradise, like an arrow shot from the valley below. They both jerked their heads toward the sound. Raoul caught his breath. Could it be a bird? Yes, it could. The cry sounded again, and Raoul began to tremble. The sound came from paradise. From Samuel. Samuel was crying out in paradise. David threw himself to his knees and gripped his hair with both hands. His mouth stretched in anguish, but only small sounds broke through his swollen throat. The next cry carried words, surprisingly clear on the morning air. Father, Father, please, Father, save me. David fell apart then. He simply fell to his side and lay there on the ground, still clutching his head. The cries came again and again. But the father did nothing, could do nothing. He only wept, face twisted and body quaking. Raoul rocked, crying. He had never imagined such pain was possible, that any living soul could endure so much sorrow and manage to keep their organs from hemorrhaging. For the first time in his memory, he wanted to die. He wanted Chapter 43, Paradise. Tuesday. Johnny tore into the hills without caring where he was going as long as it was away from the terrifying sounds in paradise. But he couldn't escape them. They drifted through the trees, and they filled his mind, pushing him faster and farther. Maybe he should have gone home instead of running out here. Surely his mother wasn't part of this. He'd been so overcome by the horror on Main Street that he didn't look for her among the others. Johnny pulled up, his breathing ragged. Something had changed. He looked around, lost. Tall pines leaned in the gusting wind. The sky seemed darker. What had changed? Samuel had stopped wailing. Johnny whipped his head back to the town. Samuel wasn't crying. Maybe they'd let him go. He turned back downhill. Samuel's faint voice was calling to him. Or at least to his memory. You and I, Johnny. We'll fix this town. Johnny found his bearings and cut through the trees, toward Smithers' saloon. His mind played back Samuel's voice, soft and sweet. In the end we will prevail, Johnny. Prevail? Samuel, where did you learn words like that? I've got news for you. We're not prevailing here. He burst through the trees behind the saloon, slid to a stop, and listened. He hurried for the back of Katie's nails and tan and leaned against the back wall to catch his breath. Laughter drifted over the wind. Led by Steve's, Johnny thought. A smack and a grunt. Chills broke over Johnny's skull. He eased around the building, slipped under the steps that led to Katie's side entrance, and pried his eyes through the gaps that faced the street. The mob stood on the church's front lawn and crowded the steps. They had Samuel on the concrete porch in front of the double oak doors. His body sagged between Claude and Chris, who held him by an arm. Johnny could see his blonde head roll to one side, but the people blocked his view of Samuel's body. A man Johnny thought might be Drive. Malone reached out and slapped the boy somewhere on his body. Johnny withdrew and slumped to his haunches against the wall. Another thud, another grunt. He buried his head between his knees and began to sob quietly. He could hear the sounds when his ears weren't covered by his arms. More thudding blows, more helpless cries, and then mostly garbled shouting and laughter. A dozen times Johnny wanted to run, almost did run. But he couldn't move. The air grew quiet for a while. Maybe now they were letting him go. Johnny poked his head around the corner and peered through the gap again. He could see Samuel now, from head to foot. They held Samuel up against the solid oak doors, with his arms spread and his head lolling on his chest. Johnny watched in horror as Roland strolled up casually and slugged Samuel in the stomach with his fist. Samuel grunted, and the boy turned around. Johnny's friend walked to the circle's edge and stood next to a woman who stared ahead, face whitewashed and barely recognizable, but there, within 5 paces, muscle in Johnny's body froze at the sight. He knelt under the steps, eyes wide, heart slamming madly, unable to move. His mind insisted that he had to get away. Mom. Want a trip, baby? Steve Smithers stepped into the circle, gripping one of his sharp stakes low. Like a spear. A grin split his jaw and he braced himself. The rest of the mob stood perfectly still, expressionless. The wind whipped their hair to the south. Steve lowered his head and stared at Samuel. Johnny tried to pull away, then he really did. But his muscles. Samuel's eyes suddenly opened, bright and blue, and he stared past the crowd, directly at Johnny. Steve Smithers lunged forward and shoved his stake at the boy's side, up under his rib cage into his chest. It sounded like a plunger. Samuel gasped and raised to his toes, face white with shock. Blood poured from the wound, over Steve's fists, and to the ground. Then the boy screamed. But this time Samuel's scream was different. A blinding white light rushed from his mouth. Johnny watched in amazement as the shaft of light blazed over the heads of the gathered killers. It cut down the middle of the town, over the charred remains of the car that Claude had burned, and smashed into Smithers' saloon. The building imploded in a ball of dust. But no sound. Only Samuel's scream, which wasn't stopping. The beam of light sliced to the right, leveling buildings, was vaporized. The old Starlight Theater, already a black skeleton, turned to white powder and settled flat. In a matter of 10 seconds, the whole southern half of the town was leveled. And then the scream fell silent, and the beam of light disappeared. Johnny spun his head back to the church. Samuel slumped over the stake and was still. He's dead. A ball of fire exploded in Johnny's head and shot through his nerves in one blinding flash. He slumped to his right side, and his mind went blank. Chapter 44. The Monastery. Tuesday. Billy jerked upright. A pain flashed through his chest, and he lifted his pen from the page, surprised. Did it come from the killing of Samuel or the death of Samuel? He reached down to the floor, scooped some worm salve in his palm, and slapped it on his chest. Of course, the killing and the death were one and the same, weren't they? No, not really. That was the problem. They carried different meanings. Meanings that now began to flash in Billy's mind. The killing. Yes, the killing came from his pen as it bit angrily into white paper, inflaming sick hearts. What did you think you were doing, coming to my town, Samuel? You wanna see what happens to stuck-up kids who try to ruin my fun? Wanna see what it feels like to trip? Wanna die? Huh, I'll show you, you puke. The whole thing went down perfectly, like a carefully choreographed dance. Deserving of thundering applause and satisfaction. But the satisfaction wasn't flowing. Not even dribbling. Samuel is dead. Yes, I killed him. Billy began to shake. The killing had been one thing, but there was the death. And it felt like the death of writing. Billy lifted his head and peered over the railing at the library below. 34 children sat upright, pens suspended over paper, looking about as if they had just awakened from a long dream. Not a single one continued to write. Billy's eyes swung to his right, where Darcy stared at him with wide eyes. The story has ended. We have written the end. Then another thought blasted through his mind. Maybe they hadn't ended the story. Maybe not at all. Maybe Samuel had ended the Chapter 45. Paradise. Tuesday. A loud clink sounded in his head. Someone had taken a nail and hammer to his skull. Clink, clink, clink. Come on, boy, wake up. Clink, clink, clink. Try his forehead, doctor. Clink on his forehead. See if that wakes him. It slowly occurred to Johnny that the sound wasn't in his head. It was on the wind, like they were building a railroad through paradise. Trains were coming to paradise. Maybe they would bring some help. Some more cops to hang on the trees. Or maybe it was coming from the church. Wasn't there something bad going on at the church? Johnny opened his eyes and peered through a gap at the bottom of the steps. The town was half gone, reduced to lumps of dust and ash. Claude and his gang stood where the old theater used to be and kicked dust. But he didn't care about them anymore. He turned his head to look at the church. The crowd had left. Only Steve remained. He had backed up and was staring at his handiwork. Samuel was there, stapled to the solid oak church doors. They had driven 2 metal stakes through his shoulders and into the wood. Wide trails of blood had flowed down his sides, pooled on the floor at his feet, and run over the concrete steps. Johnny, I think they killed him. Yes, they most definitely killed him. Johnny wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, turned into the alley, and staggered into the forest. Wanna trip, baby? He'd tripped, all right. He'd tripped real good. It was the only thought that passed through Steve's mind as he stared at the boy's dead body on the church door. Something wasn't right about what had happened here. He figured that much, but it was all he figured. Was he upset? No, not really. The kid had it coming. He had tried to ruin a good thing, and that wasn't part of the plan. Steve wasn't sure what the plan was really, but this kid wasn't in it. Or maybe this was the plan, killing this boy. He stared at the bloody stake in his right hand. A wave of nausea swept over him, then passed. Quite something, isn't it? Steve turned to the voice. Black stood with his hands on his hips, all dressed up in black without a spot of dirt on him. His blue eyes were fixed on the church doors where the boy hung. Yeah, Steve said. Black looked into his eyes and flashed a tempting smile. Makes you want to do it all over again. Steve felt his head nod once. Yeah, there was some truth to that. He might not want to do it again. Yeah, Steve said. This time he had no idea what Black was talking about. Do you know what we've done here, Steve? Do you know how far we've come in 7 short days? Steve couldn't really remember that far back. He looked at the saloon that he used to own. That whole part of town was gone, but he didn't mind. He had his stakes, didn't he? Another wave of nausea hit his gut, then passed. Well, I've got good news, buddy boy. It's just the beginning. It is. Do you know what we have to do now? Steve tried to think of an answer but couldn't. No, we have to kill the rest. Really? Yes, really. Every one of them. Starting with Johnny. We'll have to find him first. He gave us the slip. But we will, and when we do, we'll do it again. Steve just stared at him. He didn't know what to think about that. But then, maybe he did. If Black said that's what they had to do, then that was what they had to do. Yeah, he finally said. Black chuckled and winked. That's my boy. Take a break. Celebrate. When are we? When are we what? Say it. Killing. That's better, Black said. He lowered his arms, turned his back, and walked away. He thrust an arm out toward the dead boy and spoke without looking back. And get rid of that body. I don't want to see it again. Johnny sat on an outcropping of rocks just above Paradise and cried. Below him lay the remains of a town that only 7 days ago had been his home. Now it was a graveyard. He had never felt so desperate in his life. He either had to go to Delta or back to the monastery now. The monastery was closer, but with Samuel dead, he didn't know what waited up there. Billy might have killed them all. Delta was farther, and he would have to walk. The fact that his mother was still down in Paradise prevented him from taking either option. He didn't know what to do, so he just hugged his legs to his chest and cried. Then he lay down on his side. Chapter 46. The Monastery. Tuesday afternoon. Raoul heard the rap on his door. It sounded like a woodpecker searching for entrance to his skull. He looked up from the chair in which he'd collapsed, exhausted. According to the clock on the wall, it was 3 in the afternoon. Samuel's wails came back to him. Unless it had all been a nightmare. No, it had actually happened. The world had come to an end. At least Samuel's world had come to an end. And David had been sentenced to a life of regret. Yes, one moment, please. He stood and took a deep breath, straightening his shirt. The books had failed, which meant that the project had failed. And worse, much worse, Billy was still in the dungeons with the books at his fingertips. Somehow, no matter what the cost, the monks had to destroy the monastery and, if necessary, the children. The overseers had met without David late morning and agreed. They would wait until morning, but then they would do whatever they could to wipe out what they'd created here. The books were limited to the monastery and the children in the monastery. If they could destroy this place, they could remove the threat. That's where they would begin. Come. The door opened and Andrew stood in the frame. I'm sorry, Raoul, but it is urgent. David insists we come immediately. David. Now. Right away. In his study. Andrew hurried away. What could he possibly offer David now? No words would suffice. No gesture could comfort him in the wake of his son's death. In fact, their decision to destroy David's life work would surely make things worse. Raoul left his room and climbed the stairs, fighting off stark images that lingered. After the wails ceased, David lay on the stone slab overlooking paradise for another hour, like a dead man. Twice Raoul knelt over him to check his breathing. But David grunted him away. Black clouds pressed low over the town below. The day was the darkest in Raoul's memory, both physically and spiritually. David finally pushed himself to his feet, looked about, dazed, and returned to the monastery. Raoul had followed him. David showed no further signs of remorse. He simply slogged his way up the mountain, up through the monastery, and to his chambers, where he closed the door. And now David wished to see Andrew and him. Raoul followed Andrew into the study, closed the door, and faced David. Unlike David's bedroom, everything here was in perfect order, including David. Gone were the bedclothes. He wore his long stately black robe customary for formal visits. His hair was neatly groomed and the stubble had been shaved from his chin. Had the man gone mad? Or was he simply suffering an utter denial of all that had just happened? Andrew stood behind one of the guest chairs in front of David's desk. Good afternoon, sir. Raoul dipped his head. Please, have a seat. He motioned to the chairs. They eyes and found them locked on his. You're wondering if I've lost my mind. Perhaps I have. I lost my son, Christopher. Then my wife. Now Samuel. I'm within my rights. Raoul glanced at Andrew. But I don't believe I have. I believe I have been drawn into the raw, creative power of free will. I believe I have been tested and have proven myself worthy of that power. Samuel is dead, Raoul said. It sounded crass, and he immediately regretted having said it. But it was also true. He is, David said. And why is he dead? Because of the books. Because of the power behind the books. Because the evil in the children's minds was too strong for them to ignore and resist. But isn't that the course we expected of spoiled minds? At some level, Andrew said. But surely you didn't expect this. Even with the books, this was never the point. No, I didn't expect this. But I knew it was a possibility, even from the beginning. And yet you went through with it. I didn't truly believe it could happen at first. And when did you suspect? Raoul demanded, frustrated at David's dismissive tone. The director put his hand on the book and stared at its cover. I suspected. Several months ago, when Marsubi's Black found this book. I was nearly sure of it when Samuel insisted that he should go to paradise. That was only yesterday. He glared at Raoul. The project was failing. This reckless notion of mine to unleash the power of the books for good had gone amok. You so eloquently pointed that out on a dozen occasions. Then why? Do you have any idea what kind of monster we may have unleashed? Here. The man was confessing, Raoul thought. He had insisted that only love would result, because no history could be written in the books unless it led ultimately to love. Now he would admit his mistake. David took a calming breath. Beads of sweat rose on his forehead. As you know, I had Samuel write a new rule into the books 7 years ago, limiting the book's power to only those in the monastery and reaffirming the requirement that they lead to the discovery of love. We know this, Andrew said. Assuming these rules you've written actually work, Raoul said. I think the fact that this monastery exists, created by the books themselves, proves the book's power, David said. I assume you don't dispute that much. Raoul couldn't. No, not that much. Good. Then assume with me please, for my sake, that the rules do work. Assume that this will lead to the discovery of love. For me, of course. Good. Then we believe that love will eventually win the day. But when? The fact of the matter is I saw no way to curb the world that might only turn to good far down the road. I couldn't risk that. Yet you did, Raoul said. David took a deep breath. You didn't. Chapter 47. Paradise. Tuesday afternoon. The afternoon was dark. Darker than any Steve could remember. Then again, that could be his mind. He walked out into the street and headed for the church. Black had said 6 hours. He didn't know if 6 hours had come and gone, but best he could figure, it was something like that. He'd spent the hours making 12 new steaks. 1 for Katie, 1 for Jordan, 1 for Claude, and 1 for Paula maybe. Then the rest for some of the others, yet unnamed. He could hardly remember their names. For Johnny he would use the same steak he'd used for the kid. Maybe he could use all of these more than once. He would need one for himself. Eventually it would come to that, wouldn't it? Sure. Why not? Kill them all. That meant him too. Or maybe he could kill Black. Not with a steak, he couldn't. Black ate steaks for breakfast. Steve stopped beside the still smoldering car in the middle of town. Speaking of his maker, where was Black? No sign of him anywhere he could see. He'd pulled the boy's body off the church doors and hauled it outside of town limits, about 100 yards west of the old theater. Dumped it in the dry creek bed there. He started to pile rocks on it, but gave up after a few minutes because his time would be better spent making those steaks. Steve looked at the Chapter 48. The monastery. Tuesday afternoon. I had Samuel write a second entry into the books, David said. 2 entries. You made no mention. You weren't ready for it. Now you are. David turned the book on his desk and slid it toward them. Raoul and Andrew leaned forward. Samuel's familiar handwriting stared up at them. Raoul scanned the entry at the top of the page. This was the one David had revealed earlier in the week, limiting the book's power to the children. I am as skeptical as both of you. I had to have my insurance. There was a paragraph break, Raoul saw. Then another sentence. If a writer unleashes death on the path to love, the evil may be reversed by the display of a commensurate love fitting with the nature of these books. At that time, the writer who has unleashed death will no longer be able to write in these books. This rule is irrevocable. Raoul's head buzzed with the new revelation. Samuel knew this. He was in my office, reading from this book just before announcing his intention to go to paradise, David said. He knew. You're saying that his death was. Andrew sat back. There is no greater love than to lay down your life for a friend, David said. It wasn't what I had in mind when I asked him to write it, but I now realize that what has happened is precisely within the nature of these books. Billy unleashed death, and Samuel gave his life willingly, my friends. To think that Samuel had entered the town in full knowledge that his death might be the only way to turn the tide. Then the tide has been turned, he asked, shifting forward in his chair. And Billy's now powerless. Billy should be. Tears moistened David's eyes now. He looked like he would burst out in tears all over again. But he fought back the emotion. Has anything happened since Samuel's death? Not that we know. David frowned. The story is over. Samuel ended it. I have nothing left but to trust the books given to us by God. For the first time, Raoul began to see through David's eyes. He'd sacrificed his own son for the sake of the town. For the children here. But there was something strange about David's demeanor. Regardless of any victory, David should be torn in two over his son's death. With the thought came a question that lodged itself in Raoul's mind and refused to go. How could any father this side of heaven give up his son, regardless of what good it might bring? What kind of man would do that? Forgive me, David, but you knew Samuel could die. How? How could I send my son down to those butchers? David's eyes flashed. He took a breath. Because I am Samuel's only hope. His life rests in my hands. How can you say that? You didn't save him. The books could still bring him back. How? There's no one left to write in them. The books can no longer work. For any of the children below, you said so yourself. The rule is irrevocable. The books are limited. To those in the monastery we could write in the books. Preventing Samuel from going would have completely undermined my own faith. I had to let him go to prove my own faith. Raoul stood abruptly. It's why you had to let them kill him. He saw the reasoning clearly. It was the only way you could save both him and the other students. The hours of torment leading up to Samuel's death had new meaning now. David had known. He was in essence proving his faith in God by trusting the word of the book. David had become Abraham, whose faith was tested by offering up his son, Isaac. Only in this case, the son really had been killed. Unless by proving his faith, David now had a power the children no longer had. The power to write in the books with power. Have you tried? Raoul demanded. No. What are you waiting for? Write. He was forgetting his manners. Forgive me, but you must write. I am waiting for the right moment. My whole world comes down to this moment, Raoul. It can't be wasted in haste. Either I have been right, or I have been wrong. I'm not sure I want to face the moment of truth. Raoul pushed the history book toward David with a trembling hand. The moment has arrived. David stared at Andrew, then at Raoul for a long moment. He winked. So it has. He hesitated. Pen hovered. Then David withdrew it. What was he doing? He sighed, and a tear fell from his cheek onto the page. What if the books peer into the heart? David, Raoul said. You have given your heart in its entirety to this matter. It will work. If I had demonstrated even half the virtue that you have in these last days, I would rip the pen from your fingers and write it myself. Right. David nodded and gathered himself. He dipped the pen again for good measure, then lowered it to the page. He wrote quickly. Several long sentences. The scratching nearly drove Raoul mad with anticipation. He couldn't see what David was writing, and leaning closer for a look didn't seem appropriate, so he sat back down, lowered his head, and waited. The sound stopped. Raoul looked up. David glanced at him, then blew on the page. He replaced the quill, closed the book. David sat back, folded his hands, and stared at the book. Raoul wanted to ask him what he wrote, but this too seemed inappropriate. But after watching David in silence for a full minute, he couldn't help himself. What did you write? David refused to remove his eyes from the book. His fingers trembled. I wrote Samuel, my son, whom I love more than life itself, back to life. Raoul swallowed and exchanged a glance with Andrew. What else? I wrote the healing of paradise and the full physical recovery of all our students. Good. This was good. But there was more. He could see it in David's eyes. And then I wrote that all of the books of history would vanish, never again to be found by any living soul. For any reason. Raoul's eyes fell to the book on the desk. There was no way to know if Samuel was walking around paradise at this very moment. There was no way to know immediately if that the town would be healed of her wounds, or if the children would be restored. But the book's vanishing into hiding. Such a vanishing would include this. 1. It sat on the desk, a black lump of leather and paper, defiant. Vanish. Be gone. Say to this mountain, be thou removed, and it shall be removed. Yet this small mountain either hadn't heard the teach. Chapter 49, Paradise. Tuesday afternoon. The sound of the man's boots crunching on the gravel from behind him was the first sign that Black had arrived. Steve stifled a shiver of pleasure and fear and let Black come. He wanted to wait and not turn because he thought that showed some backbone, but his determination failed him. He turned. Black strode with confidence, trench coat swirling around his polyester pants, hat pulled down low over his eyes. He wasn't looking at Steve, but at the far edge of town, in the direction of the dry creek where he'd dumped the kid. Then he turned his head and glared at Steve with bloodshot eyes. I told you to get rid of his body. Did I tell you to dump him on the edge of town for the first tourist to find? Did I tell you to roll a stone or two against him and call it good? Black stopped 3 feet from him, rolled his head so that his neck cracked, and then swung an open hand at Steve's face. His palm struck Steve's cheek with a loud smack that sent him reeling onto his rump. His head throbbed with pain. I. Black kicked his boot into Steve's gut. His whole body jerked off the ground, flew several feet, and landed hard. He still had his stake in his right hand though. Stand up. Steve struggled to his feet. Black hit him again, this time with a fist to his left shoulder. It popped loudly and dangled at an odd angle, dislocated. Do you think you'll still be able to kill without eyes, Steve? My eyes. I have a thing for eyes. Black. Chapter 50. The Monastery. Tuesday afternoon. The seconds passed, one by agonizing one. And with each tick, Raoul felt his heart sink deeper and deeper. He could hardly imagine the despondency ravaging David's heart now. Andrew looked on in silence. David suddenly slammed both fists on the desk, one on either side of the book. It bounced slightly, then rested still. Lifeless. David's jaw was fixed and his eyes glassy. He stood and strode toward the window, face flushed. He wore his failure on his entire body. He stifled a sob, then brought his fist to his mouth to control any outburst. Raoul rose and approached David. For the second time in this day he wondered if he wouldn't prefer death to the pain of such great sorrow. You have to be patient. I am finished being patient. David cried, spinning. I have nothing left to give. I would rather die now than live without my son. You would fall on your sword rather than lead us. David's eyes went wide. What did you do with it? Your sword. A figure of speech. Not the sword, the book. He was staring over Raoul's shoulder. Raoul whirled. The book was gone. He glanced at the floor, thinking it might have fallen. I didn't touch it, he stammered. It's gone. Andrew cried. They stood like 3 schoolchildren, transfixed by the sight of the empty desk. It's gone, David said. Raoul ran to the desk, placed his hand on the spot where the book had laid. It's gone. The book is. The door swung open to Raoul's left. There in the door frame stood a boy. It was Billy. He was covered in blood and sores, and the rotting gel of worms covered what was left of his flesh. He looked utterly lost. The boy's arms hung limp, and in his right hand he held a pen. Raoul looked at the boy's face. Only then did he see that Billy was crying. Tears streamed down his cheeks. His shoulders began to shake with sobs. The pen slipped from his fingers and fell to the floor. Chapter 51, Paradise. Tuesday afternoon. Marsuves Black cocked two fingers like a rattler's fangs and gripped Steve's dislocated shoulder with his other hand, ready to take his eyes. Oddly enough, Steve didn't wince. He felt the pain in his shoulder all right. He thought he might pass out from it. He heard the crunching of his bones. But he saw the bright lights in Black's eyes and knew the man was finding fascination and pleasure in this violence, and for some reason that made it all okay. I don't need you, Steve, any more than I needed the monk. I can use Claude or Chris. I can use Paula. Nausea again. This time it didn't pass. It welled up through his chest and stung his eyes. He was going to throw up. But he didn't. The feeling was worse than the pain in his shoulder. Tears filled his eyes. For the first time since Black had come into town, Steve wanted to die. I'll kill them all, Steve said. I swear, all. His ears began to ring. Black jerked his head up and looked at the sky. Steve followed his stare. At first he couldn't see that anything had happened. Then he squinted and he saw it. The sun was out, and the black clouds were moving. Boiling, rolling, flying up and back and away, as if a huge vacuum cleaner was sucking them into deep space. Behind it all was blue sky. And a brilliant afternoon sun. Black still had his hand on it was hot, hazy hot, mid-afternoon on a hot summer day hot. And so, bright. But nothing else. Black's face beaded with sweat. Steve followed his gaze again. Nothing but shimmering heat above the flattened buildings. What was happening? And then Steve saw a distortion in the haze. Something was moving toward them, walking down the middle of Main Street in the distance. A small figure obscured by the heat. The boy. Black's hand began to tremble on his shoulder. His arm twitched. 2 fingers still raised to strike. As for Steve, the nausea had passed. Beyond that he didn't know what to feel. The boy walked toward the edge of town, arms loose at his sides, small and frail, hardly more than an apparition distorted by heat waves. He didn't have a shirt on, and his skin was covered in dried blood, but he was definitely alive. And looking right at them. Then the child entered paradise, and the buildings began to rise from the dust. Johnny jumped to his feet and stared at the clearing sky. Something was happening. He'd watched Black walk up to Steve and slap him around, but now both of them were still. Something was happening. He could feel it in the air. Not just the clouds. Not just the sun. Not just the sudden heat. Something bigger. He scrambled to the edge of the rocks and strained for a better view. Black still hadn't moved. For a while nothing moved. And then the old theater began to move. Johnny crouched, disbelieving what his eyes were seeing. The old theater was rising from the ground, rebuilding itself layer by layer, quicker than he could keep track of, like one of those demolitions he'd seen on the television, only in reverse. And not just the old theater, but all the buildings around it. Paradise was being rebuilt from the ground up. Johnny blinked, then blinked again. The Starlight Theater, Smithers Saloon, Claude's convenience store, Katie's nails and tan houses. How could he saw the boy then, walking down the middle of Main Street. A snapshot of Marsuves Black walking into town the same way 7 days earlier filled his mind for a second, and then was gone. This wasn't Black. This was Samuel. Johnny tore down the mountain. Steve couldn't process what was happening around him at first. Things were going backward, rising and flying and moving at impossible angles. The town was rising from the ashes. And the small boy was walking straight toward them, right past the buildings as if they weren't rising from the ground miraculously. His eyes were fixed on Steve. Black cursed once under his breath. He dropped his hand from Steve's shoulder and cursed again, a long string of hushed, vile words punctuated by spittle. His tirade ended mid-sentence, and in a fit of fury he slugged Steve in the gut, hard enough to break some ribs. Steve gasped and doubled over. From the corner of his eyes Steve watched as Black grabbed his own coat. Spun once, and vanished into the folds of cloth. Black's clothing collapsed to the ground, had bounced once, rolled to one side, and came to rest 3 feet from the pile of clothes. Steve couldn't breathe. Where had Black gone? What was happening? But he knew. This boy was happening. When he managed to stand straight again, he saw 2 things. He saw that the town was the way it had been a week ago, before any of this had happened, except the leaves were still gone from the trees and sand still dusted the streets. And he saw that the boy had stopped 10 feet from him and was staring up at him with soft, round eyes. He felt dizzy. Hadn't he killed this boy? There was no hole in his side where Steve stuck the stake, but there was caked blood all over. Black had told him to kill the boy and he had done it good. Others came out of their houses and stared at the town in awe. Was this a test? Was this how he could keep Black from taking his eyes? Should he take the stake in his hand and kill Samuel again? Maybe that's what Black wanted him to do. Look at me, Steve, the boy said. Johnny sprinted past the old theater, which now stood in mint condition, or at least in as mint condition as it had been 7 days ago, which was pretty tattered but mint, sweet mint, to Johnny. He ran right into town, briefly glancing at several dozen people who were staring at Samuel and Steve. Claude and Chris, what did I tell you? Now this is the truth. Black was from the pit of hell, but God has sent us a hero. A superhero. Johnny slid to a stop to the left and behind Samuel. Look at me, Steve, Samuel said. Samuel was naked except for his shorts and shoes. Blood had dried on his body. But Johnny had to hold himself back from throwing his arms around Samuel's chest. Steve looked at Samuel. His eyes widened and his lips softened. Samuel was showing him love, and Steve wasn't quite sure what to do with it. What did I tell you all? What did I say? Johnny felt like his chest would explode. Samuel looked at Johnny. The boy didn't smile. He didn't say anything. He just winked. Then he turned his gaze back to Steve. The man stood dazed. His hands and clothes were streaked with blood, and he smelled like he'd rolled in a pile of compost. But the glassy look in his eyes faded away, and his mouth opened in dumb wonderment. Grace and hope are dead without love, Steve, Samuel said. Just those words. Johnny felt a lump rise into his throat. Love, Steve. Do you want me to love you? Steve's face wrinkled under the words. He dropped the stake in his right hand. Yes. It was more a question than an answer, but that was evidently fine by Samuel, who'd come out on the church steps. The man staggered under its power. It hit a man who stood under the trees by the church, and the man put a hand on a trunk to steady himself. Johnny began to cry. He couldn't help it. He just began to shake with sobs. I believe you are loved, Steve, Samuel said. Oh, God, Steve groaned. Oh my God, what have I done? Johnny was going to burst. I believe, he whispered. Louder, Johnny, Samuel said. Say it louder. Samuel was looking at Steve but speaking to Johnny. He felt unraveled, like a frayed hemp rope. Steve was trembling now, but so was Johnny. I believe, Johnny said as loud as his constricted throat would allow him. Then he screamed it at the top of his lungs. I believe. The light hit him with a force that seared his mind, paralyzed his spine, and left him dazed and warm. Johnny sat hard, dumbstruck. This was love. Time seemed to slow. He might have been down for only a minute, lost to the world, but it felt like an hour. The sound of sobbing pulled him back into paradise. He lifted his head. Steve was on his knees, bawling like a baby. Samuel was holding his head, chin lifted to the sky. Tears streamed down his cheeks. Johnny pushed himself to his feet and watched Samuel, straining to catch the boy's words. But he didn't need to strain because Samuel's words suddenly rang out clearly for all of them to hear. "Father," he sobbed. He drew a breath. "Father." Chapter 52. The Monastery. Thursday. The books were gone. All of them. 2 days had passed since Samuel's death. 1.5 days since he'd awakened in the creek bed and walked into paradise. He'd told the story 100 times. How he'd been beaten and killed and then left to rot. How his father had brought him back to life and healed paradise. "I still can't believe it all happened," Johnny said, staring down at paradise from the ledge. "How did it feel?" Billy and Darcy looked at Samuel. The 4 children had come together for the first time since the story ended. Like the rest of the children in the monastery, Billy and Darcy were healed almost immediately and were eager to renew their acquaintance with the boy who had resisted their writings. "How did what feel, the dying or the living?" Samuel asked. Johnny hesitated, unsure he wanted an answer. "Either," he said. Samuel shuddered. "The dying. I'm not sure I can describe how terrible it felt. But I kept telling myself that my father could save me. I had to believe that." Darcy stared out at the blue sky. She wasn't the same girl Johnny had met in the dungeons. The whole experience seemed to have knocked the wind out of her. "If you don't mind, can we talk about something more uplifting?" Billy asked, considering it was Darcy and I who were responsible. "Were you?" Samuel asked. "They didn't have to listen to you." Johnny didn't. Billy shrugged. "And I didn't have to listen to Black. But I did." Thinking of Billy as his brother was a mighty strange thing. Half-brother. Actually, Johnny and Billy had different fathers, but they had both been born to Sally, his mother, and that was weird. Samuel's father had taken Billy in as the 37th orphan when he learned that Stanley Jordan was forcing Sally to put him up for adoption. In a strange way, Billy's writing had been an act of unwitting vengeance on the town that abandoned him. Maybe it was this wrongdoing that made them so receptive to Billy's writing. Maybe not. "Where is Black?" Johnny asked. "You mean the real Black?" "Dead," Billy said. "My Black killed him. In a week the other teachers will be gone too," Samuel said. "Your father's abandoning the monastery. Burying it. The books are gone, and without the books, there is no project. What will you do?" "My father's going back to Harvard. Andrew and Raoul are setting up an orphanage in New Jersey for any of the kids who want to stay with them. Some want to go back to their home countries. You guys decide yet." Billy and Darcy shook their heads. Johnny felt sorry for them. All they knew was up in that monastery, about to be buried. "Maybe you could live with me and my—" "Anyone really know what happened to him?" Samuel pulled the stalk of grass he'd been nibbling on from his mouth. "Hopefully he vanished with the books. Hopefully. That's the thing. My dad isn't sure about Black. The books are gone, the monastery is being buried, the town is back to normal, even the people down there are getting back to normal life, right, Johnny?" "I wouldn't call it normal. They spend a lot of time in the church. Hardly anyone wants to talk about Black, if that's what you mean. He's gotta be gone." "Even if he isn't," Billy said, "I was the one pulling his strings, right? So, without the books, he's powerless." "He had a book," Johnny said. "I saw it on the church podium once." "A blank book?" Billy asked. "You sure? Looked exactly like the ones you wrote in." "But it must have disappeared too," Samuel said. "Had to have." Right, Darcy said. "Then Black's history," Samuel said. "Probably," Darcy said. "Probably," Billy agreed. "And we're not," Johnny said. They all looked at him. A slow smile formed on Billy's mouth. "Thanks to Samuel," Billy said. "Thanks to Samuel," Johnny said. And then no one said anything. An excerpt from Saint. I see darkness. I'm laying spread eagle on my back, ankles and wrists tied tightly to the bedpost so that I can't pull them free. A woman is crying beside me. I've been kidnapped. My name is Carl. But there's more that I know about myself, fragments that don't quite make sense. Pieces of a puzzle forced into place. I know that I'm a quarter-inch shy of 6 feet tall and that my physical conditioning has been stretched to its limits. I have a son whom I love more than my own life and a wife named Kelly, of course, Kelly. How could I hesitate on that one? I'm unconscious or asleep, yes, but how could I ever misplace my wife's name? I was born in New York and joined the Army when I was 18. Special Forces at age 20, Ranger at 21, now 25. My father left home when I was 8 and I took care of 3 younger sisters. Eve, Ashley, Pearl, and my mother, Betty Stropel, who was always very proud of me for being such a strong boy. When I was 14, I hit Brad Stenko over the head with a 2x4 and called the police when he slapped my mother. I remember his name because his proposal to marry my mother terrified me. I remember things like that. Events and facts cemented into place by pain. My wife's name is Kelly. See, I know that. I really do. And my son's name is Matthew. Matt and Kelly, right. I'm a prisoner. A woman is crying beside me. Carl snapped his eyes wide, stared into the white light above him, and immediately closed his eyes again. Opening his eyes had been a mistake that could have alerted anyone. Watching to his awakening, he scrambled for orientation. In that brief moment, eyes wide to the ceiling, his dirty mattress under him, and the crying woman, strapped down beside him. Otherwise the room appeared empty. If there was any immediate danger, he hadn't seen it. Then it was safe to open his eyes. Carl opened his eyes again, quickly confirmed his estimation of the room. Then glanced down at a thick red nylon string bound around each ankle and tied to 2 metal bedposts. Beside him, the woman was strapped down in similar manner. He was dressed in black dungarees pushed up to his knees by whomever had tied them down. No shoes. The woman's left leg had been pulled over his and was strapped to the same post that held his right leg. Her legs had been cut and bruised and the string was tied tightly enough around her ankles to leave marks. She wore a pleated navy blue skirt, torn at the hem, and a white blouse that looked like it had been dragged through a field with her. This was Kelly. He knew that, and he knew that he cared for Kelly deeply. But he was suddenly unsure why. He blinked, searching his memory for details, but his memory remained fractured. Perhaps his captors had used drugs. The woman whose name was Kelly faced the ceiling, eyes closed. Her tears left streaks down dirty cheeks and into short blonde hair. Small nose, high cheekbones, a bloody nose, and several scratches on her forehead. I'm strapped to a bed next to a woman named Kelly who's been brutalized. My name is Carl and I should feel panic, but I feel nothing. The woman suddenly caught her breath, jerked her head to face him, and stared into his soul with wide blue eyes. In the space of one breath Carl's world changed. Like a boiling heat wave, vented from a sauna, emotion swept over him. A terrible Carl, her face twisted with anguish. Fresh tears flooded her eyes and ran down her left cheek. Kelly. She began to speak in a frantic whisper. We have to get out of here. They're going to kill us. Her eyes darted toward the door. We have to do something before he comes back. He's going to kill. Her voice choked on emotion. Carl's mind refused to clear. He knew who she was, who he was, why he cared for her, but he couldn't readily access that knowledge. Worse, he didn't seem capable of actually feeling, not for more than a few seconds. Who are you? She blinked, as if she wasn't sure she'd heard him right. What did they do to you? He didn't know. They'd hurt him, he knew that, but he didn't know who he was, much less who they were. She spoke urgently through her tears. I'm your wife. We were on the cruise at port in Istanbul when they took us. 3 days ago. I think they took Matthew. Don't tell me you can't remember. Details that he now remembered rehearsing in his mind before waking flooded him. He was with the Army, Special Forces. His training was extensive and dark. They'd been taken by force from a market in Istanbul. Matthew was their son. Kelly was his wife. Panicked, Carl jerked hard against the restraints. He was rewarded with a squealing metal bed frame, no more. Another mistake, he thought. Whoever had the resources to kidnap them undoubtedly had the skill to use the right restraints. He was reacting impulsively rather than with calculation. Carl closed his eyes and calmed himself. Focus. You have to focus. They brought you a shot, she said hurriedly. I'm pretty sure they want you to kill someone. Her fingers touched the palm of his hand above their heads. Clasped his wrist. I'm afraid, Carl. I'm so afraid. Crying again. Please, Kelly. Slow down. Slow down. I've been tied to this bed for 3 days. I thought you were dead. They took our son and you want me to slow down. The room faded and then came back into view. They stared at each other. For a few silent seconds. There was something strange about her eyes. He was remembering scant details of their kidnapping, even fewer details of their life together, but her eyes were a window into a world that felt familiar and right. They had Matthew. Rage began to swell, but he cut it off and was surprised to feel it leave as quickly as it had come. His training was kicking in. He'd been trained not to feel. So then his not feeling was a good thing. I need you to tell me what you know. I've told you. We were on a cruise. No, everything. Who we are, how we were taken. What's happened since we arrived. Everything. What did they do to you? She asked again. I'm okay. I just can't remember. You're bleeding. Her eyes stared at the base of his head. Your hair. He felt no pain, no wetness from blood on his neck or in his hair. He lifted his head and twisted it for a look at the mattress under his hair. A fist-sized red blotch stained the cover. The pain came then, a deep throbbing ache from the base of his skull. He set his head back down and stared at the ceiling. With only a little effort, she blinked, still breathing deliberately. You had a month off from your post in Kuwait and we decided to take a cruise to celebrate our 7th anniversary. Matthew was buying some sugared ginger when a man grabbed him and went into an alley between the tents. You went after him. I saw someone hit you from behind with a metal pipe. Then a rag with some kind of chemical was pushed over my face and I passed out. Today's the first time I've seen you. She closed her eyes. They tortured me, Carl. Anger rose, but again he suppressed it. Not now. There would be time for healing later, if they survived. His head seemed to be clearing from whatever drug they'd given him. More than likely they'd kept him drugged for days and whatever they'd put into his system half an hour ago was waking him up. That would explain his temporary memory loss. What nationality are they? Hungarian, I think. The one named Dale is a sickening. She stopped. But the look of hatred in her eyes spoke well enough. Carl blocked scattered images of whatever Dale might have done to elicit such a reaction from her. Again, that he was able to do this so easily surprised him. Was he so insensitive to his own wife? No, he was brutally efficient. For her sake he had to be. Their captors had left their mouths free. If he could find a way to reach their restraints. The door suddenly swung open. A man with short cropped blonde hair stepped into the room. Medium height. Knife-like nose and chin. Fiercely eager blue eyes. Khaki cotton pants. Black shirt. Hairy arms. Dale. He knew this man. This was Dale Crompton. This was a man who'd spent some time in the Dark spaces of Carl's mind, making himself hated. Kelly had the man's right arm hung by his side, hand snug around an Eastern bloc. Makarov 9mm pistol. This detail was brightly lit in Carl's mind where other details remained stubbornly shrouded by darkness. He clearly knew his weapons. Without any warning or fanfare, Dale rounded the foot of the bed, pressed the barrel of the Makarov against Kelly's left thigh, and pulled the trigger. The gun bucked with a thunderclap. Kelly arched her back, screamed, and thrashed against her restraints for a moment, then dropped to the mattress in a dead faint. Carl's mind passed the threshold of whatever training he'd received. His mind cried out for him to feel nothing, to lay uncaring, cold and calculating in the face of brutal manipulation, but his body had already begun its defense of his wife. He snarled and bolted up, oblivious to the pain in his wrists and ankles. Naturally, the movement proved useless. He might as well be a dog on a thick chain, jerked violently back at the end of a sprint for freedom. He collapsed back on the bed, and gathered himself. Kelly lay still. A single glance told him that the bullet had expended its energy without passing through her leg, which meant it had struck the femur, probably shattering it. "I hope I have your attention," Dale said. "Her leg will heal. A similar bullet to her head, on the other hand, will produce far more satisfying results. I'd love to kill her. And your son. What is his name?" "Matthew." Carl just stared at him. "Focus. Believe. You must believe in your ability to save them. Pity to destroy such a beautiful woman," Dale said, walking to the window. "Just so you know, I argued to tie your son next to you and keep Kelly for other uses, but Kalman overruled me. He says the boy will be useful if you fail us the first time." The Englishman put the gun on the sill, unlatched the window, and pulled it, "surgically implanted at the base of your hypothalamus gland. This explains the bleeding at the back of your head. The device will release chemicals that will destroy your brain within 10 seconds of being released, an event that will be triggered by any attempt to remove the device or by a remote signal. Your life is in our hands. Is this clear?" The revelation struck Carl as perfectly natural. Exactly what he would have expected, knowing what he did, whatever that was. "Yes. Good. Your mission is to kill a man and his wife currently housed in a heavily guarded hotel at the edge of the town directly to our south, 3 miles distance. Joseph and Mary Fabin will be in their room on the 3rd floor. No one else is to be killed. Only the targets. You have 2 cartridges in the gun. I suggest you use them wisely. No headshots. We need their faces for television. Do you understand?" A wave of dizziness swept through Carl. Aside from a slight tick in his right eye, he showed none of it. Beside him, Kelly moaned. How could he ignore his wife's suffering so easily? Carl eyed the pistol on the sill. "I understand. You'll be watched closely. If you make any contact with the authorities, your wife will die. If you step outside the mission parameters I've outlined, she dies. If you haven't returned within 60 minutes, both she and your son will die. Do you understand?" His mind screamed in protest. He spoke quickly to cover any fear in his eyes. "The name of the hotel." "The Andrassy," Dale said. He walked over to Carl. "Who are the targets?" "They are the 2 people who can save your wife and son by dying within the hour." The man cut through the bonds around Carl's other ankle and then casually went to work on the rope at his wrists. "You'll find some shoes and clean clothes outside the window." With a faint pop, the last tie yielded to the Englishman's blade. Kelly whimpered and Carl looked over to see that her eyes were open. Again. Face white, muted by horror. For a long moment, lying there freed beside the woman he loved, Carl allowed a terrible fury to roll through his mind. Despite Dale's casual dismissal of him, he knew that he stood at least an even chance of killing him. A terrible set of emotions collided in his chest. He wanted to touch Kelly. And tell her that she would be okay. That he would save her and their son. He wanted to tear the heart out of the man who was now watching them with a disconnected stare, like a robot assigned to a simple task. He wanted to scream. He wanted to cry. He wanted to kill himself. Instead, he lay still. Kelly closed her eyes and started to sob softly. He wished she would stop. He wanted to shout at her and demand that she stop this awful display of emotion. Didn't she know that emotion was now their greatest enemy? 58 minutes, Dale said. It's quite a long run. Carl slid his feet off the bed, stood, and walked to the window, thinking that he was a monster for being so callous in her moment of horror, never mind that it was for her sake that he steeled himself. I'm in a nightmare, he thought, reaching for the gun. But the Makarovs, cold, that he would spin where he stood, shoot Dale through the forehead, and take his chances with the implant or whatever other means they had of killing him and his family. The only way he knew to deal with such a compelling urge was to shut off his emotions entirely. He clenched his jaw and shoved the gun into his waistband. I love you, Carl. He looked at her, forcing emerging terror back. It'll be okay, he said. I'll be back. He grabbed both sides of the window, thrust his head out to scan the grounds, withdrew, shoved his right leg through the opening, and rolled onto the grass outside. When he came to his feet he was facing south. How did he know this was south?